Cotard syndrome, the belief that you're already dead. You wake up, but something feels missing. The light still pours through the window. The hum of life continues outside. But inside, a quiet certainty settles in your bones. You no longer exist, not metaphorically, not in the poetic sense, but truly, you are dead. And everything you're seeing is just the echo of a life that already ended. This isn't a thought. It isn't a mood. It's a conviction. Cotard syndrome is one of the rarest and most disturbing psychological conditions ever recorded. Known as the walking corpse delusion, it convinces people they are dead, rotting, or have lost essential organs. Some believe they no longer need to eat because their body no longer functions. Others claim they can't die again because they've already passed on. The syndrome was first identified in 1880 by French neurologist Jules Cotard, who described a patient who denied the existence of her body and believed she had no soul. Since then, scattered cases have emerged, most often tied to severe depression, psychosis, or neurological injury. But no matter the cause, the experience is the same. Reality loses its grip. Life becomes a dream the mind can no longer wake from. Imagine walking down a street, convinced the people you pass are alive, and you are not. That your reflection in the glass is not your own. That every sound, every sensation is happening in a world that has already moved on. And you are left behind, a conscious ghost trapped in a shell that refuses to decompose. What makes Cotard so terrifying isn't just the delusion, it's the logic behind it. Many sufferers are painfully lucid. They don't rant or shout. They explain their condition calmly, with chilling sincerity. Their eyes don't flicker with confusion. They look at you with quiet certainty, as if they've seen something the rest of us are still pretending not to. And perhaps that's what disturbs us most. That somewhere deep down, their belief touches something ancient and primal, the fear that life itself might be an illusion, that the self can vanish while the body continues moving, that maybe we're not as anchored to existence as we think. Not all who experience Cotard syndrome recover. For those who do, the memory of it haunts. They describe the sensation not as madness, but as emptiness, an eerie disconnection from the world, like floating in a hollow version of reality. And even after the belief fades, one question often lingers. If your mind could ever fully believe that you were dead, how sure are you that you're alive now? Capgras Delusion, when loved ones become imposters. You walk into the kitchen and your mother is standing there. She turns, smiles, asks if you want tea. Her voice is the same. Her face is the same. She moves the way she always has, habitual, familiar, gentle. And yet a single thought cuts through the moment like a cold blade. That's not her. It looks like her. It speaks like her. But something behind the eyes is wrong. Empty. Artificial. You know it in your bones. She's been replaced by someone or something. This is Capgras Delusion, a rare and deeply unsettling psychological condition in which the sufferer believes that someone close to them, often a spouse, parent, or friend, has been replaced by an identical-looking imposter. Unlike most delusions, Capgras is not loud or manic, it's quiet, icy. The person afflicted doesn't scream or run, they simply disconnect. It's named after Joseph Capgras, a French psychiatrist who first documented it in 1923. One of his patients believed that her family had been replaced multiple times, sometimes by doubles, sometimes by actors. She lived in constant, calculated suspicion, never quite sure who was real, but utterly convinced that some of them weren't. What's eerie is how specific this delusion is. The person recognizes the face. They can describe it in detail. They know the name, the habits, the history, but the emotional recognition, the deep limbic sense that this is someone you know and trust, is gone. The result is a mental split. You see someone you love, but you feel nothing. And the mind can't accept that contradiction, so it invents a bridge. This must be an imposter. Neurologists believe it stems from a disconnection between visual recognition and emotional memory. The part of the brain that identifies a face still works, but the part that makes that face feel familiar doesn't fire. It's as if the heart forgets what the eyes remember. And so the mind rewrites the story. To outsiders, it seems irrational. But to the person trapped in it, Capgras feels like the only explanation that makes sense. They're not being paranoid. They're trying to solve a terrifying riddle. Why does my mother look exactly the same, but feel like a stranger? This delusion can extend beyond people. Some believe their pets have been replaced. Others think their homes are replicas, their reflections altered, their lives staged. It spirals subtly and steadily into a fractured reality where nothing is quite what it was. But perhaps the most disturbing part is the emotional toll, not just on the person with Capgras, but on the ones they reject. Imagine being told by someone you love that you are no longer real, that your presence has been hollowed out, that your face is just a mask. And even if the delusion fades, it leaves behind a lingering unease. If your mind could ever believe that the people you love are imposters, how do you know it won't again? Depersonalization. When you become a stranger to yourself, you're brushing your teeth. The mirror fogs a little from the warmth of the water. You look up and your reflection is there. It blinks when you blink, moves when you move. But something feels wrong. The person looking back doesn't feel like you. Not exactly. More like someone playing your part. You finish brushing. You speak out loud to test your voice. It's yours, and yet, somehow, it doesn't feel like it belongs. This is depersonalization. It's not madness. It's not hallucination. It's awareness without ownership. A sense of watching yourself from behind glass. You are present, you are thinking, but the feeling of being yourself, of truly inhabiting your thoughts, your body, your voice, begins to slip away. People describe it differently. Some say it's like acting in a play. Others call it a waking coma, a detachment, a numbness. Not physical, but existential. You know you're alive. You're just not sure it's you living. Neurologically, depersonalization is understood as a kind of disconnection between systems responsible for emotion, memory, and self-awareness. It often appears in response to intense stress, trauma, or anxiety. The brain, trying to protect itself, turns down the volume. It blunts the panic, but in doing so, it accidentally dulls everything. And what's left is a world that feels distant, even your own mind. You may look at your hands and think, these are mine, but it feels like you're just borrowing them. You might hear your own laugh and wonder if it really came from you. Sometimes, even your thoughts feel like they're happening in a space slightly outside of where you are. This isn't a delusion. People experiencing depersonalization often know that nothing has truly changed. They're rational, grounded, but that's what makes it worse. They know the world is real, and they know they exist. They just can't feel it. And the lack of feeling makes them doubt the knowing. For some, it's a passing experience triggered by exhaustion, grief, or sensory overload. For others, it lingers days, weeks, even months. And the more they focus on the strangeness of it, the more it deepens, like trying to wake up from a dream you know isn't real, but you can't leave. It's not insanity. It's not spiritual detachment. It's a glitch in self-perception. But that glitch raises a question that's hard to unthink. If you can lose the feeling of being yourself, what exactly is the self? Derealization. When the world feels like a movie set, you step outside and everything looks normal. The trees are still. The cars pass like they always do. A neighbor waves. You wave back, but something's off. The colors feel muted. The sky looks painted on. The world hasn't changed, but it no longer feels real. It's like watching your own life from the audience. This is derealization, a psychological state where reality loses its vividness, its weight, its grip. The world seems distant, artificial, dreamlike. Not distorted, but hollow. People describe it as walking through a replica of their life. Everything is where it should be. But it's like being trapped inside a wax museum of the real world. And the worst part, you know it isn't a dream. You know nothing has technically changed. But that knowledge doesn't help, because your senses are whispering that something fundamental has shifted, that reality is just acting. It often begins subtly. Lights feel too bright. Sounds seem delayed. The air feels thick or too still. Conversations echo strangely. Familiar places feel newly constructed, like stage sets waiting for actors to arrive. You begin to suspect that behind the surface of the world is nothing at all, just cardboard walls and empty silence. Psychologists say derealization is often linked with anxiety, trauma, or sensory overload. The brain, overwhelmed, decouples you from your surroundings in an attempt to protect itself. But the result is disconnection, a loss of intimacy with the moment you're living in. You don't believe the world is fake. You feel that it is, and the distinction is everything. Some compare it to looking at your life through a screen. Others say it's like remembering a memory that never actually happened. The world becomes less of a place you're in and more of a thing you're watching. Like the glass between you and the real has thickened overnight. People learn to function with it. They shop, work, smile, but deep down, they're waiting for something to snap back into place, waiting to feel the moment click, waiting to believe again in the texture of things. And while depersonalization makes you doubt yourself, derealization makes you doubt everything else. But then, a stranger passes you on the street. You catch their eyes. Something flickers in your chest. Recognition? Maybe. But for a moment, it's as if the world blinks too, as if it remembers itself through you. And just when you think you're starting to understand the unfamiliar, the world plays another trick. What if the familiar suddenly turns strange? Jamais vu. When the familiar becomes foreign, you're reading a word you've written 1,000 times before. Maybe it's your own name. Maybe it's something simple like window or blue, but suddenly the letters look strange. The word feels off, alien, as if you're seeing it for the first time, and it doesn't belong to any language you've ever known. You say it out loud. It sounds even stranger. You write it again. The meaning slips further away. This is jamais vu. Literally, never seen. The eerie cousin of déjà vu. But where déjà vu makes the unfamiliar feel familiar, jamais vu turns the familiar uncanny. A room you know by heart feels rebuilt overnight. A loved one's voice seems subtly wrong. A routine gesture buttoning a shirt, opening a door feels like you're imitating yourself rather than simply being. It's as if the world has been replaced by a nearly perfect copy. Almost everything matches, but not quite. Scientists believe it's a temporary failure in cognitive fluency, the brain's smooth, automatic recognition of patterns. The circuits that usually confirm, yes, I've seen this before, suddenly falter. And when they do, your brain pauses, re-examines. Suspicion floods the moment. And suddenly, certainty collapses. It's a glitch that feels like a warning. Some experience it only for a few seconds, mid-conversation, mid-thought. Others spiral into it during exhaustion or panic, questioning whether anything around them is real. It's not a loss of memory. It's a loss of emotional recognition. You know what something is. You just don't feel like you know it anymore. And the more you try to force it to make sense, the more it slides away. Writers, musicians, even teachers have documented moments where their own work, repeated too often, turns foreign. A phrase repeated aloud over and over begins to lose its shape. The sound turns hollow. The meaning evaporates. You are left holding something that looks like what you know, but feels like a stranger. There's no clear danger in jamais vu. No voices, no hallucinations. But it leaves behind an aftertaste of something broken, a reminder that perception is a contract. Your brain is constantly renegotiating. And once you feel the contract bend, it becomes hard not to test it again. What else could come loose? What else could unravel beneath the surface of awareness? Because if a single word can suddenly feel wrong, what happens when it's you that doesn't feel real? Out-of-body experiences, watching yourself from outside, you're lying in bed, still, eyes closed, breathing shallow, and then something shifts. Suddenly, you're above yourself. Not metaphorically, not in imagination, but viscerally. You can see the shape of your body beneath you, its weight sinking into the mattress, the slow rise and fall of your chest. You know it's yours. But it doesn't feel like you. You float just beyond the reach of your skin. This is the out-of-body experience, a moment where consciousness seems to detach from the body entirely. Some describe it as peaceful, others call it terrifying. But the common thread is dislocation, awareness without weight, vision without eyes. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it happens during surgery, sometimes in the seconds before sleep, sometimes during trauma, meditation, or extreme exhaustion. And for a fleeting moment, you are both subject and object, the observer and the observed. Neurologically, this phenomenon has been tied to the temporoparietal junction, a region of the brain that integrates visual, spatial, and bodily information. When that system misfires, the self can become unanchored. You still exist, but you no longer know where. Some out-of-body experiences are accompanied by a sense of floating, moving through walls, or traveling to impossible places. Others are starkly literal, hovering a few feet above the scene, watching events unfold like a camera in the ceiling. And while some interpret the experience spiritually, others see it as a quirk of the brain's desperate attempt to make sense of stress. Either way, the result is the same. The core of your identity leaves the familiar space of the body and drifts. But the most haunting part isn't the experience itself, it's what it reveals. How quickly the mind lets go of the flesh. How easily your sense of self detaches from the thing you thought was you. And once it does, the world begins to look different. You start to wonder, if I can observe myself from outside, then what am I? Am I the body, the watcher, or the distance between the two? For some, the experience is life-changing, a spiritual awakening, a fracture in the illusion of separateness. For others, it becomes a source of deep anxiety, because if you can float outside of yourself once, what's keeping you inside now? And if the self can slip from the body so effortlessly, what other presence might slip in? The third man factor. Invisible companions in crisis. You're alone. At least you thought you were. The wind howls. Your muscles shake. You've lost your bearings somewhere between exhaustion and fear. But just as your thoughts begin to spiral, a strange calmness enters, not from within. From beside you, a quiet presence, unseen, unexplained, yet unmistakably there. You feel watched, but not in danger. Guided, but not led. This is the third man factor. A strange, often life-saving experience reported by people in extreme conditions: mountaineers lost in storms, sailors adrift at sea, survivors of disasters. In their darkest moments, they report the sudden arrival of an unseen figure, a silent companion who offers reassurance, direction, or the will to continue. They don't hallucinate a face. They just know someone is with them, walking beside them, keeping them alive. The name comes from explorer Sir Ernest Shackleton, who described such a presence during a desperate journey across South Georgia Island in 1916. He later wrote that he and his two companions were all convinced a fourth person had joined them, though no one was ever seen. Since then, dozens of accounts have surfaced: climbers on Everest, astronauts in orbit, prisoners in solitary confinement. The pattern repeats: extreme isolation, overwhelming stress, and then a presence. Some believe it's spiritual, an angel, a guardian, a soul not your own. Others point to neuroscience. Under intense stress, the brain may activate internal models of social support, a kind of psychological life raft, your mind creating the feeling of a companion to stop you from drowning. But even those who understand the science often remain shaken because the presence doesn't feel imagined. It feels realer than that, more intimate than fantasy, more precise than wishful thinking. It doesn't just show up, it acts, speaks, comforts without ever saying a word. And here's where it gets stranger. Some people report meeting their third man long before crisis, in dreams, in meditation, in the split second between panic and control. As if this presence doesn't arrive, it waits and only appears when the rest of the world disappears. You can explain it away if you like, as brain chemistry, as memory, as myth. But the question it raises lingers long after the moment passes. If something can appear inside you that feels like someone else, who's really alone inside your mind? Prosopagnosia, when every face is a stranger's face. You're at a cafe. A friend approaches the table, smiling. You smile back, politely. You nod, say hello, try to match their energy. But inside, you're scrambling. Their voice is familiar. Their mannerisms too. But their face, nothing. No flicker of recognition, no internal click, just a blank. It could be anyone. This is prosopagnosia, also known as face blindness. It's not forgetfulness, and it's not a lack of attention. People with prosopagnosia can see eyes, noses, mouths, all the details are intact, but the pattern doesn't register. The whole doesn't come together. It's like reading a sentence where the letters never form words, just fragments. Some are born with it, others develop it after brain injury or neurological illness. The region most often implicated is the fusiform face area, an area specialized for facial recognition. When it fails, the human face becomes just another object in the visual field, complex, expressive, but not familiar. Imagine navigating the world this way. Every day, you meet people you've already met. You learn to memorize hairstyles, clothing, voices, routines. You look for tattoos, gaits, jewelry, anything but the face, because the face is unreliable. A riddle with no answer. Now imagine what that does to your sense of connection. You're at a party, and someone hugs you. You don't know why. You nod politely. Pretend, but you feel the distance. Not just between you and them, but between you and yourself. Because recognizing others is part of recognizing your place in the world. And when that bond frays, so does identity. Some compensate. They learn to laugh off mistakes. They tell people not to take it personally. But inside, there's often anxiety, shame, a persistent fear of appearing cold, distant, rude. Not because they don't care, but because the social map they rely on is full of holes. Others withdraw entirely. If everyone feels like a stranger, what's the point? There's no cure, just adaptation. And with effort, many navigate beautifully. But prosopagnosia leaves behind a powerful question. If you can no longer recognize the people you love, how long before you stop recognizing yourself? Because when every face is unfamiliar, what happens when the unfamiliar looks back? Thought insertion, when your mind is no longer yours. You're sitting in silence. Nothing unusual has happened. You're simply thinking, as people do, fragments of sentences, images, ideas flickering into awareness. But then something shifts. A thought enters your mind, and it doesn't feel like it came from you. It's in your head. You hear it with your own inner voice, but it feels placed, like it was slipped in when you weren't looking. This is thought insertion, a rare but deeply disturbing psychological phenomenon where individuals experience their own thoughts as being controlled or implanted by someone else. Not just influenced, not suggested, but imposed. It's as if the boundary between self and other has dissolved. The mental firewall has failed. People experiencing thought insertion often describe the thoughts as foreign, familiar in form, but alien in origin. They'll say, "I didn't think that," even as the thought plays in their mind. They may point to outside forces, a government, a stranger, a presence beyond comprehension. But always, the feeling is the same. Someone else is thinking inside me. It's commonly associated with schizophrenia, but the experience itself isn't confined to that diagnosis. Even outside clinical definitions, many people have felt the eerie dissonance of thoughts that seem to arrive uninvited, ideas that disturb, interrupt, or seem entirely unlike their own usual thinking. Is it imagination, suggestion, or a sign that the mind is not a sealed chamber after all? The unsettling part is how this fractures the very core of identity. If you can't trust your own thoughts, what can you trust? The voice inside your head has always been the last refuge of selfhood. When that's breached, where do you go? And it's not just the presence of strange thoughts, it's the helplessness. The sense that the strings of your internal world are being pulled by unseen hands, that there is no longer a clear you behind the curtain, just a stage, and someone else writing the lines. But even if thought insertion is a misfiring of the brain, a perceptual error, it still raises a disturbing possibility. How often are our thoughts truly our own? Every day, we absorb advertising, opinions, beliefs, stories, fears. We echo things we've heard so often we forget we didn't invent them. We feel convinced without knowing why. We act without tracing the thought back to its origin. Maybe the real horror isn't the occasional foreign thought. Maybe it's realizing how many of the familiar ones were never truly ours either. Somatoparaphrenia, when your own body becomes a stranger. A woman sits in a hospital bed, recovering from a stroke. Her left arm rests on the blanket. It doesn't move. It hasn't in days. But when the doctor points to it, she frowns. "That's not my arm," she says calmly. "It belongs to someone else. Maybe the nurse left it there." She isn't joking. She isn't confused. She simply knows with perfect clarity that the limb attached to her body is not hers. This is somatoparaphrenia, a rare and disorienting neurological condition in which a person denies ownership of a part of their own body, usually following brain damage to the right hemisphere, often due to stroke. Most commonly, the left arm or leg is affected. The person sees it, feels it, but is absolutely convinced that it belongs to someone else. You might expect fear or panic, but often the reaction is strangely calm. They may express irritation, "Whose arm is this?" or indifference, "You can take it away if you like." It's as if the brain has cleanly erased the connection between identity and flesh. The body part remains physically present, but psychologically exiled. Unlike typical body numbness or paralysis, somatoparaphrenia includes a narrative. The mind doesn't just fail to feel the limb. It invents an explanation for its presence: an intruder's arm, a prank, a surgical mistake. The brain, desperate to make sense of an unrecognizable part of itself, constructs a story rather than accept dissonance. It's not that they forget what their arm looks like. It's that something has broken in the internal map of the self. And once the self no longer recognizes its own body, the world begins to feel less stable. How much of you is anchored in your body? In your hands, your legs, the subtle rhythm of your heartbeat? Strip those away, and what's left? Patients with somatoparaphrenia can often describe the limb in front of them in detail: its size, its color, its position. But emotionally, it's as foreign as a coat draped over the bed. You can see it, but it has no gravity, no ownership. And while rare, this condition reveals something chilling about the architecture of identity. It's fragile, patchwork, dependent on invisible neurological threads. Cut a few, and the mind no longer feels at home in the body it lives in. And if your own arm can become someone else's, what else might you mistake as yours that was never yours at all? The McGurk Effect. When your eyes rewrite what you hear, you're watching someone speak. Their lips form the syllable. You hear it clearly. But then, without warning, their mouth changes. It starts saying, even though the audio hasn't changed. You replay it again and again. Your ears insist it's B. Your eyes insist it's F. And the strange part? You believe your eyes. This is the McGurk Effect, a powerful illusion that reveals just how easily the senses can betray one another. Discovered by cognitive psychologist Harry McGurk in the 1970s, the phenomenon occurs when visual and auditory information clash. When the mouth says one thing and the audio says another, the brain doesn't choose between them. It blends them. The result is a third, often entirely new perception. Not what you saw, not what you heard, but something that feels strangely convincing. You're not imagining it. Your brain is. This isn't just a party trick of perception. It's a window into how deeply intertwined our senses really are. You'd think hearing happens in the ears and seeing in the eyes. But the truth is more complicated. The brain stitches together input from multiple channels, creating a version of reality it considers most likely, most coherent. Even if it's completely wrong, that stitching happens faster than awareness. Before you can question it, the illusion settles in. You trust it, you hear with your eyes. And that trust raises unsettling questions. How often do we think we're perceiving clearly when we're actually experiencing a hallucination agreed upon by our senses? The McGurk effect doesn't only affect isolated syllables. In real life, subtle mismatches between sight and sound are everywhere. Bad dubbing in a film, a poor video call connection, crowded rooms where you must watch someone's lips to understand their words. In all these cases, the brain fills in blanks and not always with the truth. It gets even stranger. The effect still works even when you know it's happening. Awareness doesn't protect you. In fact, trying to ignore the visual component often makes the illusion worse. You're not just misled, you're compelled to be. And beneath that lies something deeper, our illusion of direct perception. We like to believe we see and hear the world as it is, that our senses are windows, clean and undistorted. But they're more like paintings done from memory, full of guesses, corrections, and compromises. And once you realize your senses are negotiating reality behind your back, you begin to wonder what else they're agreeing on without your consent. Chronostasis. When time skips a beat, you glance at a clock. The second hand moves. But for some reason, it feels like it takes longer than a second to tick. You blink, look again. This time, everything seems normal. But that first glance lingers in your mind. The moment stretched unnaturally, as if time itself paused, held its breath, and then resumed. This is chronostasis, a quiet temporal illusion that tricks you into believing the first moment after shifting your gaze lasts longer than it should. The effect is most famously noticed with clocks, called the stopped clock illusion, but it happens all the time. When you glance at your phone, when you look at someone's face, even when you turn your head quickly in a room. Your brain, it turns out, is playing catch-up. When you move your eyes rapidly from one point to another, a process called saccadic motion, your brain suppresses incoming visual information. It doesn't want to feed you a blur, so it blanks that gap out entirely. And once your eyes land on the new object, the brain backdates the image, extending the moment artificially to cover the silence. It invents continuity. That stretched moment is not real. It's a reconstruction, a filling in of lost time, a polite lie that keeps your sense of the world smooth and seamless. But once you notice it, it can become disorienting. Because if the brain can manipulate your perception of a second, what about an hour, a memory, a lifetime? Chronostasis is fleeting, subtle, but its implications are profound. It shows us that time, as we experience it, is not simply ticking in the background. It is filtered, edited, smeared. Your brain doesn't show you time as it is. It shows you time as it needs to be for you to function without constant interruption. And the more you look, the more you find the distortions. You remember the summer that seemed to last forever, the train ride that vanished, the breakup that collapsed time into fragments. Emotion stretches and compresses time. Novelty dilates it. Boredom crushes it. Trauma suspends it. But with chronostasis, the distortion doesn't come from emotion. It comes from vision. from the mechanics of attention, from a silent blind spot stitched with illusions. You never feel the break. You only feel the story your brain told to patch it. And once you start to wonder how many of your seconds were fabricated, you begin to notice the gaps, the little voids where you weren't really there. And sometimes those voids get bigger. Microsleep. When the brain shuts down without asking, you're driving. The road is quiet. Your hands rest on the wheel. A stretch of straight pavement unfolds ahead. And then blink. You're still driving. But something is wrong. You don't remember the last few seconds. Or maybe the last few minutes. The road has changed. You passed a sign you didn't read, a turn you didn't see, and yet the car is still moving straight, as if nothing happened. You were there, and then you weren't. This is microsleep, an invisible collapse of consciousness lasting just a few seconds. A momentary blackout where the brain enters sleep while the body continues, for a time on autopilot. Most people have experienced it without knowing. A heavy blink during a lecture, a nodding head in a meeting, a line of text you've read 3 times but still can't remember. It's not daydreaming. It's not distraction. It's a full, neurological shutoff, just long enough to lose your grip on reality. And it happens while your eyes are open. The brain is unforgiving when deprived of rest. It doesn't negotiate. It takes what it needs. And when exhaustion accumulates, microsleeps slip in like thieves, stealing seconds, erasing awareness, bypassing your will entirely. In sleep labs, participants have been shown to stop responding to stimuli during microsleeps. Parts of the brain go offline. Vision narrows. Auditory input fades. It's as if the mind steps out of the room for a breath and returns before you even realize it was gone. Most terrifyingly, this often occurs during critical tasks, like driving, operating machinery, or making decisions. And because the episodes are so brief, most people deny they happened at all. I was just blinking. I was just thinking. But the truth is darker. You were unconscious. And you didn't know. Microsleep exposes something fragile about control. We like to think of ourselves as stable, present, in command. But the mind has layers, and those layers can collapse beneath us, quietly and without warning. What makes microsleep unsettling isn't just the risk, it's the reminder that awareness is not continuous, that you can vanish from yourself for 5 seconds and not remember the absence, that you can disappear while remaining upright. And if consciousness can flicker like that, without warning, without your consent, then maybe what we call being awake is thinner than we think. More like a flickering flame than a steady light. And when it goes out, even for a moment, who or what is left behind to steer? The Uncanny Valley. Why almost human feels terrifying. It smiles. But something is off. You can't say why. The eyes are symmetrical. The mouth moves at the right time. The skin is smooth. Maybe too smooth. The face looks human, sounds human, moves like a person, and yet every part of you recoils. You're not just uneasy, you're disturbed. This is the Uncanny Valley, a psychological phenomenon where humanoid figures, robots, dolls, digital faces become more unsettling the closer they get to appearing human, but not quite. It's not a simple curve of familiarity, it's a valley, a sharp dip. A sense of eeriness that spikes precisely because something looks almost, but not exactly real. The term was first coined by roboticist Masahiro Mori in the 1970s. He noticed that as robots become more lifelike, our affinity for them increases until a point, then suddenly it plummets. When they're clearly machines, they're endearing. When they're indistinguishable from humans, they're fascinating. But in between, they're wrong. They trigger something deep and ancient, like seeing a corpse that breathes or a face that smiles without warmth. We notice micro-movements that don't match, skin texture that looks too perfect, emotions that feel rehearsed, and our brains send a silent warning. This should be human, but it's not. Why does this happen? Some researchers suggest it's evolutionary. Our ancestors learned to detect illness, danger, or death by noticing subtle irregularities in faces. A twitch too slow, a gaze too fixed, a skin tone just slightly wrong. Those cues meant something was off, possibly dangerous, so we evolved a sensitivity to not quite right human forms. Others point to conflicting signals. When visual cues suggest a living person, but emotional cues fall short, the brain struggles to reconcile the data. We want to connect, but we can't. And the gap creates unease. This isn't just theoretical. The Uncanny Valley affects how we respond to AI avatars, CGI characters, prosthetic limbs, and even certain makeup styles. It's why some video game characters feel creepy, why ventriloquist dummies disturb us, why androids in films evoke dread instead of empathy. The Uncanny Valley isn't about what we see, it's about what we expect and what happens when that expectation is betrayed. Because when something imitates humanity closely enough but fails to cross the finish line, it doesn't look less human. It looks like something pretending to be human. And the mind, for reasons it doesn't fully understand, responds with a chill. Because if that smile isn't real, who or what is smiling? Pareidolia, seeing faces in the inanimate. You're alone in your room at night. The lights are off. The shadows stretch. On the far wall, something catches your eye. You blink, then squint. A face. Not a clear one, more like the suggestion of one. Two dark spots for eyes. A vague nose. A curve that could be a mouth. It stares back at you, waiting, watching. Then you realize it's just a coat draped over a chair, or the pattern in the curtains, or a power outlet on the wall. But even knowing that doesn't make the feeling vanish. This is pareidolia, the deeply human tendency to see patterns, especially faces, in random or unrelated things. Clouds become animals. Toast bears the image of a saint. The moon has eyes. The front of a car smiles or sneers. We don't just see shapes. We assign meaning. Pareidolia is one of the most common and harmless cognitive quirks. It's built into us. Infants respond to face-like patterns within days of birth. Evolution likely favored this hyper-awareness. Mistaking a tree for a predator might cause a false alarm, but mistaking a predator for a tree could be fatal. The brain, ever cautious, errs on the side of too much recognition. But pareidolia doesn't just help us survive. It reminds us how deeply we crave connection. We want to find faces, emotions, intention, even in rocks and ruins and stains on the wall. It's not just visual, it's emotional. A pattern that feels familiar, that offers the illusion of presence in an otherwise indifferent world. Religious icons appear in burnt tortillas. Martian faces emerge in blurry satellite photos. People don't just see, they believe, they feel the weight of the pattern. The story hiding inside randomness. And sometimes, that story becomes hard to let go of. Artists have long played with pareidolia, drawing hidden figures into clouds or faces into furniture. But the most unsettling moments happen when it's uninvited. A statue that seems to blink, a smile in peeling paint, a whisper of expression carved by erosion. The eeriest thing is, once you see it, you can't unsee it. Even after you remind yourself it's just wood grain or chipped tile, the illusion lingers. You glance back. The face remains. Because pareidolia isn't just an error. It's a mirror. It shows us how the mind reaches into the void and pulls out meaning, even where none exists. And if we can see humanity in the lifeless, what do we miss when the living hide behind masks? Apophenia. When meaning appears from nothing, you're thinking of someone you haven't spoken to in years. Their name, out of nowhere, floats into your thoughts. A childhood friend, a lost connection. And then your phone lights up. A message from that very person. You freeze. You smile. Unsettled. What are the odds? This is apophenia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things. Coincidences feel like messages. Random events seem fated. A song lyric answers a question you never said aloud. A street sign feels like a personal omen. Two strangers say the same strange word within minutes of each other. Statistically, nothing has happened. Psychologically, everything has. Apophenia is more than just pattern recognition. It's emotional pattern recognition. It doesn't just see structure. It assigns weight, intention, purpose. The universe stops being chaotic. It becomes personal, a story, one that stars you. We all do it. When the lights flicker at the perfect dramatic moment, when your favorite number appears again and again, when a dream bleeds into real life in just the right way, the moment feels charged, alive. The brain, of course, is designed to connect dots, and when it can't find dots, it creates them. This ability gave us myths, superstitions, religions, poetry, and conspiracy theories. It gave us hope, and sometimes delusion. In psychology, apophenia underlies everything from gambling addiction to paranoia. A roulette player sees patterns in randomness. A person under stress hears meaning in static. A conspiracy theorist draws lines between unrelated events until the web becomes so tight it feels undeniable. But it's not always extreme. Sometimes, apophenia gives us comfort, a sense that life is stitched together by something more than accident, that maybe, just maybe, the world is listening. The example that everyone can relate to. Have you ever had a string of strange coincidences so oddly aligned that you whispered to yourself, that can't just be chance? Maybe you dreamed about a song and heard it playing in a taxi the next day. Maybe you kept seeing the same numbers, or a stranger said something aloud that answered the very question in your mind. No one else would notice, but to you it hits like thunder. Rationally, you know there's no cause, but something in you feels it. Like the universe blinked, like something peeked through. And that's the power of apophenia. It doesn't prove that meaning is real. It just proves that you are looking for it. And sometimes, looking is enough to make it appear. Sensory gating deficit. When you can't tune the world out, you're trying to read. Just a few quiet minutes with a book, but the sound of a ticking clock suddenly feels loud. A refrigerator hum starts to crawl under your skin. You hear your neighbor's footsteps, your own breathing, a dog barking 2 blocks away. You can't focus, not because of one loud noise, but because of all of them. Welcome to the fragile boundary we rarely notice until it fails. Sensory gating is your brain's ability to filter out irrelevant stimuli, the background noise, the faint smells, the flickering lights. Without this filtering, every bit of sensory input arrives at once with equal urgency. Imagine trying to hold a conversation while every sight, sound, and sensation is fighting for your attention simultaneously and without hierarchy. Most of us experience minor glitches in this system when you're tired, or anxious, or overstimulated. But for those with sensory gating deficits, often associated with conditions like schizophrenia, ADHD, or autism spectrum disorder, this overload is constant. The world doesn't just feel louder. It is. Every whisper is a shout. Every flicker is a strobe. Every passing thought becomes a crowd. But here's the relatable part. Think of the last time you tried to work in a noisy cafe, or when you couldn't sleep because of a blinking LED light, or when you felt overwhelmed in a shopping mall, not from any single sound, but from everything happening at once. That irritation, that tension in your chest, that's a glimpse. Now imagine never being able to turn it off. Sensory gating deficit isn't about hearing better. It's about hearing everything, seeing everything, feeling everything. It's as if the brain's bouncer walked away, and now every minor sensation walks right in and demands attention. In daily life, this creates exhaustion. Imagine trying to focus on a conversation while also noticing the air conditioning, the flicker of someone's hand movement, the smell of someone's coffee, the slight vibration of your phone, the taste of your toothpaste still lingering, and the internal chatter of your own mind all at once. That's not just distracting, that's disabling. And the tragedy is that it's invisible. From the outside, the person looks sensitive, maybe moody, but inside, they're navigating a world without volume control. A world where even silence screams. Sensory gating is one of those brain functions we never think about until it slips, but it holds our sanity in place more than we know. It creates the illusion of calm in a noisy world. And when it breaks, you don't just hear too much, you feel like you're disappearing beneath it. Visual snow syndrome, when static invades your sight. Imagine this. You're looking at a blank wall, or the sky, or a dark room before sleep. But instead of emptiness, you see a field of tiny flickering dots, like static, like TV snow. Not just in the corner of your eye, but everywhere. It doesn't blink, it doesn't fade, it just buzzes. That's what people with visual snow syndrome experience constantly. It's not a hallucination in the traditional sense. The world is still there. Faces, objects, movement, but it's overlaid with a fine, restless shimmer, like your eyes are tuned to the wrong frequency, or like reality has a veil of noise stretched over it. And the most disturbing part, it never stops. For some, it's subtle. A faint texture across the sky. For others, it's overwhelming, paired with light sensitivity. After images, floaters, and halos around lights, text can blur, depth becomes harder to judge, and darkness becomes a canvas of chaos. Doctors used to dismiss it as imaginary, just another anxiety symptom. But more recent studies, though still limited, suggest it's neurological. A misfiring in the brain's visual processing system, a perceptual glitch that never resets. But here's where it gets unsettling for everyone. Think about the last time you stared at a blank wall or a dark ceiling at night. If you paid close attention, didn't you see something? A little movement? A faint flicker? Your eyes twitch, your brain adjusts, and there it is, a faint dancing layer of noise. That's normal, temporary. Your brain filters it out. Now imagine if it didn't. Imagine if the static stayed. That's visual snow syndrome. It doesn't take your vision away. It corrupts it, like a low-level interference humming behind everything. Most people with it can still function. They drive, read, live. But it's always there. A reminder that perception isn't perfect. That reality isn't clean. It's hard to explain to others. You say static, and they think you mean blurry vision. You say snow, and they imagine white light. But it's neither. It's like a signal that won't settle. A visual itch that can't be scratched. And once you notice it, it becomes hard to ignore. Because it shows us something profound, that even our clearest moments, our sharpest views, are layered with distortion. It's just that most of us are lucky enough not to see it. Akintopsia, when motion vanishes from reality. You reach for a glass of water. Your hand moves. The world shifts gently, as it always does. Except, in this world, it doesn't. The glass isn't gliding into your hand. It's jumping. Your arm doesn't flow. It teleports in slices. The water doesn't pour. It appears in sudden, impossible frames. This is akintopsia, also known as motion blindness, a rare and deeply unsettling neurological condition in which the brain loses the ability to perceive movement. The world becomes a series of still images, disconnected by gaps in time, like watching reality through a strobe light, or trying to catch the fluid motion of a dancer in a series of broken snapshots. The condition was first brought to light through the case of a woman known as LM, after a stroke damaged specific areas in her brain, particularly the middle temporal visual area. She reported that people didn't walk, they vanished and reappeared further down the hall. Pouring coffee was impossible. The liquid would appear frozen, then suddenly overflowing. She couldn't cross the street. Cars would be far away, then abruptly right in front of her. What makes akintopsia terrifying isn't blindness. It's that you can still see, but not movement. Your vision still receives shape, light, texture, but loses the transition, the in-between. And without that, the world becomes unpredictable, dangerous. We don't think about how much of our stability comes from motion, the subtle movements of lips when someone talks, the flow of traffic, the way a ball arcs toward us, the way a friend's expression softens gradually. All of this depends on seeing change happen in time. Without that continuity, you're lost in snapshots, like time is being chopped into fragments and fed to you out of order. And here's the part anyone can relate to. Imagine your internet connection stuttering during a video call. The person freezes, then jumps. You catch only pieces of what they said. Their gestures are broken. Their smile is no longer real. It's a frozen echo that lags behind emotion. Now imagine that always. Not on a screen, but in life itself. Akintopsia reminds us that seeing isn't just about light. It's about time. The invisible glue that connects one moment to the next. Strip that away, and the world doesn't just look strange. It becomes unknowable. And in that frozen silence between frames, you're left wondering what you missed, while the world continued moving without you. Phantom touch illusion. When your brain feels what isn't there. You're in virtual reality, a simulation. Your real body is still, wearing a headset, gripping plastic controllers. But in the simulation, someone reaches out and touches your hand, or your arm, or your face. And you feel it. Not as pressure or heat, but as a distinct tingling, a shimmer of contact, a gentle push on a part of your body that no one is actually touching. This is the phantom touch illusion. It's the sensation of being touched when there's no physical touch at all, only the belief that you're being touched. It doesn't require pain, force, or even realism. Just intention, just presence, just the idea that someone or something is reaching for you. And your brain fills in the rest. We're more familiar with the phenomenon than we realize. Have you ever flinched when someone swings a fist toward you, even if they stop short? Have you felt your skin crawl watching bugs on a screen? Or winced when a character in a movie gets hurt and you feel that echo in your own body? Those are all echoes of phantom touch, simulations of pain, simulations of contact. But in virtual environments, the illusion deepens. Research has shown that even when users know their real body isn't being touched, they report tactile sensations if their virtual body is touch the digital hand, and the brain activates areas associated with real touch. Because as far as your brain is concerned, seeing a touch and feeling a touch are connected. Sometimes overwhelmingly so. And it doesn't just happen in VR. People with missing limbs often report phantom limb sensations, feeling itches or pain in arms or legs that no longer exist. Their brain still maintains a map of that limb, and stimuli, visual or imagined, can activate it. The phantom touch illusion reminds us of something both wondrous and disturbing. Your body is not a fixed reality. It's a story your brain tells itself. And that story can be edited, hacked, rewritten. All it takes is the right signal, a visual cue, a sound, a suggestion. That's why a feather traced in the air near your skin can make you shiver. Why a memory of touch can make your skin tingle. And why an invisible finger in a virtual world can leave behind a very real feeling. If your body can feel things that aren't there, how much of what you call sensation is just belief? And when belief is all it takes, what else can your mind make real? Source amnesia. When you remember the fact, but forget the truth. You remember hearing that coffee can dehydrate you. You repeat it casually to a friend, confident. But where did you hear it? A doctor? A study? Or maybe just a meme? You're not sure anymore. The information feels true. The origin feels. That's source amnesia. It's when your brain retains what you know, but forgets where you learned it. You recall the content, but not the context. The memory survives, but it floats, untethered, and the mind, eager to fill the gap, often invents or assumes a source. That assumption can quietly shape your beliefs, your decisions, even your sense of reality. Source amnesia doesn't just cause confusion, it creates a kind of false confidence. When we can't trace a fact to its origin, we're more likely to treat it as universally known, obvious. Everyone knows that, we say, when really we don't even remember where we learned it. And here's the twist. The more often we repeat something, the more disconnected it becomes from its original context. It turns into common sense, even if it began as a rumor. This is why myths survive, why misinformation spreads, why conspiracy theories grow. But it doesn't just affect the gullible or uninformed. It affects everyone, and often in subtle ways. Imagine this. You're arguing with a friend about a historical event. You're certain a particular fact is true. You remember it, but you don't remember how you came to know it. A documentary? A school lesson? A movie? A dream? And now you're standing on this foggy memory, arguing as if it's solid ground. That's source amnesia. It shows up in courtroom testimonies, academic writing, even everyday conversation. People misattribute quotes, conflate memories, and repeat misinformation, all while feeling completely certain. And it's deeply human. The brain is designed to prioritize content over context. In evolutionary terms, what you learned, "These berries are poisonous," mattered more than who told you. But in a world flooded with information, context has become vital. Without it, we can't tell evidence from anecdote, truth from hearsay. And sometimes, not even we know how much of what we believe is actually secondhand. Because when the source is gone, what's left is a ghost of truth, a fragment with no anchor. And if you can't remember where your memory came from, can you trust it at all? Cryptomnesia. When your brain plagiarizes itself, you're writing a poem, or composing a melody, or coming up with an idea for a story, a joke, even a business plan. It flows effortlessly, like inspiration whispered it into your mind. You feel brilliant. Later, someone points out, this already exists, that exact melody, that exact phrase, that exact idea. But you're not lying. You weren't trying to steal it. You truly believed it was yours. That's cryptomnesia, a psychological glitch where a person recalls something but forgets it was ever learned from someone else. The memory returns without its label, and so the mind mistakes it for something original. Unlike source amnesia, where you remember a fact but forget where it came from, cryptomnesia involves a creative act. You generate something, an idea, a sentence, a solution, believing it's new. But it's not. It's a reprint of something you encountered before, now stripped of its origin and passed off by your brain as invention. It's unconscious plagiarism, and it's more common than most people realize. Musicians have famously fallen into this trap. George Harrison's My Sweet Lord was so similar to the chiffons He's So Fine that a judge ruled it copyright infringement, even though Harrison claimed he had no memory of hearing the original song. Writers, too, often stumble here. You might read a phrase that sticks with you, a metaphor, a twist, a character idea. Years later, it reemerges, familiar but not labeled. So your mind does what it always does with unlabeled thoughts. It claims them. And how could it not? Your brain is a vast library, filled with fragments of everything you've seen, read, heard, and thought. When one of those fragments rises to the surface without a citation, it feels like a revelation. Here's a relatable moment. Have you ever made a clever joke, only to realize later that you heard someone else say it years ago, or had a new idea for a movie plot, only to discover it's the exact structure of a film you saw as a child? That's cryptomnesia. It's not deceit. It's a misfiled memory. And it reveals something quietly humbling. Much of what we think of as original thought may just be forgotten echoes, memories in costume, old ideas reborn in our own voice. Cryptomnesia is the mind unknowingly borrowing from itself and then forgetting that it ever borrowed at all, which leaves a haunting question behind every stroke of genius. Was that truly you, or just something your mind remembered without telling you? Déjà Rêvé. When dreams come back to life, you walk into a room you've never seen before. The air is unfamiliar, the lighting strange, but then a flicker. Something inside you whispers, I've been here, not in waking life, not in memory, but in a dream. This is Déjà Rêvé, literally already dreamed, a cousin to Déjà Vu, but with a deeper eeriness. It's not just the feeling that something is familiar, it's the sense that this moment, this place, this conversation happened in a dream you had long ago. And now, in waking life, it's unfolding again, perfectly. People who experience déjà rêvé often report a sense of prophetic recognition. Not just I've seen this, but I dreamed this before it happened. A word-for-word conversation, a detail in a stranger's face. A moment that clicks, not with the past, but with something dreamt and forgotten. And the strangest part, you can't prove it. Unlike a memory of a real event, dreams slip through the fingers. Most are forgotten within minutes. So when a scene from daily life feels like it echoes a dream, there's no way to confirm it. You just know. It creates a powerful illusion of premonition, and sometimes that illusion is so strong it feels like fate itself is playing out a script you forgot you wrote. Scientists believe déjà rêvé may arise when fragments of dreams get stored improperly in memory, lodged like shards in the wrong drawer. Then, when you encounter a similar situation in real life, the brain lights up with recognition, even though the source was never real to begin with. It's memory without grounding, familiarity without fact. But here's the relatable piece. Have you ever had a dream so vivid that hours or days later, you weren't sure whether it actually happened? Maybe you dreamed you had a conversation with someone and then felt a jolt of confusion when you remembered it too clearly. Or you walked through a moment in real life and suddenly recalled a dream with the same colors, the same angle of sunlight, the same words on a sign. That moment feels scripted, but the script is buried somewhere you can't reach. That's déjà rêvé. It shows us how dreams, though ephemeral, can leave real fingerprints on our lives. And when one of those prints matches something in waking life, we begin to question the boundaries. Did I dream this moment into being? Was my mind reaching forward in time? Or is it all just coincidence? A quiet reminder that dreams too are part of memory. And if dreams can return in daylight, how many other forgotten worlds live just beneath our waking minds? Prospective memory failure. When intention dissolves into nothing, you tie a string around your finger. You jot it in your planner. You even say it out loud. Don't forget to call. And then you forget. Not because you're careless, not because you didn't care, but because the thought simply never arrived when it was supposed to. This is prospective memory failure, when you forget to remember. It's not the kind of forgetting where you lose a fact or a name. It's the moment when a task vanishes before it ever happens. You knew you needed to pick up milk. You knew you had that appointment, but somehow the future plan never made it into the present moment. And later, when you remember, it's already too late. Prospective memory is the mental system that lets us remember to do things in the future. It's not passive recall, it's an active alert system, a way for your mind to bring back an intention at the right time. But that system is fragile. It's competing with everything else in your brain, the sights, sounds, conversations, distractions. It's like leaving a note on a desk in the middle of a hurricane and expecting it to stay in place. And the failure is so quiet, so normal. You walk past the mailbox again. You open the fridge and realize, too late, that the eggs are gone. You promise yourself to send that message, then stare in horror as hours pass, and the moment is gone. Everyone experiences it, but some experience it constantly. Those with ADHD, traumatic brain injury, or age-related cognitive decline often report chronic prospective memory failure. It's not about intelligence, it's about a disconnect between intention and execution. The will exists, the need exists, but the mechanism that brings the memory to the surface at the right moment breaks. You don't forget because you didn't care. You forget because the reminder system inside you never fired. And here's the eerie twist. You may never even realize what you've forgotten, because prospective memory failure doesn't always come with a sense of loss. If the memory never resurfaces, it can vanish without a trace, like a future that was never born. Think of it like setting a timer that never rings. The dish burns, the window closes, the call never comes, and you wonder, wasn't I supposed to do something today? That question lingers, like smoke from a fire you don't remember lighting. Prospective memory is a kind of hidden thread in life, quiet, invisible, but holding everything together. And when it snaps, what disappears isn't knowledge. It's the future you meant to live. Reduplicative paramnesia. When reality clones itself, you wake up in a hospital room. The lights are unfamiliar. The ceiling tiles repeat in a way that feels off. A nurse enters and tells you where you are, but something in you resists. You know this hospital. You've been here before. In fact, you're certain of it. Except, this isn't the same place. You're miles from where you think you are. Different city, different building, different staff. Still, you know this place. You recognize the layout, the hallway, the voices behind the doors, and yet it makes no sense. You believe the hospital is real, but you're convinced it's been duplicated, moved, or rebuilt, or somehow cloned. This is reduplicative paramnesia, a rare and deeply disorienting delusion in which a person believes that a place, or sometimes even a person, exists in more than one copy, that the space around them is both real and not quite right, that it has been replaced, replicated, or shifted without explanation. Unlike typical memory lapses or disorientation, this isn't a case of simple confusion. It's a persistent belief that reality has doubled. The condition was first formally documented in the early 1900s, often linked to brain injuries, strokes, or dementia. It typically involves damage to the frontal lobes, where reasoning and judgment reside, and the right hemisphere, which helps us orient ourselves in space. When these regions misfire together, they can give rise to a kind of fractured spatial certainty, a where that doesn't match the what. People have reported believing their homes were moved to identical neighborhoods, or that a hospital was secretly operating in two different locations, and they were shuttled between them without knowing. Some have claimed loved ones were replaced, not with imposters, but with duplicates. There's something deeply uncanny about it. Reality, as we know it, relies on the idea of uniqueness. One place, one person, one version of events. When that certainty breaks down, the world feels like a mirrored hall, echoes of the familiar warped into something unreal. And here's a gentler echo you might recognize. Have you ever walked into a hotel room that felt like one you stayed in before, even if it wasn't? Or visited a city for the first time and felt a strange déjà vu, not just of a moment, but of a layout, as if the entire space had been copied from somewhere else in your memory? Most of us experience fleeting, benign versions of this sensation, but for those with reduplicative paramnesia, the illusion takes over. It becomes a belief, a logic-defying certainty that no argument can break. And it leaves you asking a question that sounds absurd, but in that moment feels completely rational. Why does this place exist twice? Because when the mind starts duplicating reality, truth isn't just lost, it's multiplied. Misattribution effect. When your brain pins truth to the wrong place, you hear a story at a dinner party. Something strange, something unforgettable. A man who faked his own death and returned years later to attend his own funeral. Months go by. The image sticks in your mind. The details shift slightly. And then one day, you find yourself telling the same story. But now, it's yours. Maybe it happened to a friend. Maybe you read it in an article. Maybe you saw it in a film. You're not lying. You're not even exaggerating. You simply no longer remember where the story came from. You've just experienced the misattribution effect. It happens when the brain retrieves a memory correctly, but places it in the wrong context. The content is real, the details may even be accurate, but the source, the timing, or the person involved gets blurred, reassigned, relocated. You remember what happened, but you misremember who, where, or how. It's disturbingly easy to do. You might see a face on TV, then later swear you saw that person at a grocery store, or hear a quote in a movie, and later attribute it to a famous philosopher. Or worst of all, testify in court that someone committed a crime simply because their face feels familiar. This effect is why eyewitness accounts are so notoriously unreliable. Memory is not a recording. It's a reconstruction, a weaving together of fragments stored in different parts of the brain, and each time you retrieve a memory, you risk altering it. Like copying a file and accidentally saving it in the wrong folder. And here's the twist. The more often we access a memory, the more likely it is to degrade, not in clarity, but in accuracy. We become more confident, even as the details drift further from the truth. It's not deception. It's how memory works. Psychologists have demonstrated this in countless studies. Participants read a list of words related to sleep, bed, rest, pillow, but not the word sleep itself. Yet later, many confidently recall seeing it. The brain fills in what should have been there. And when the mind feels confident, it rarely double-checks. But the misattribution effect isn't just about stories. It's about identity. Have you ever found yourself convinced you came up with an idea only to discover someone else said it first? Or misremembered who told you a secret, a joke, a warning? That flicker of uncertainty is where the mind quietly edits its own history. And once it's edited, how would you even know? The misattribution effect invites an unsettling question. How much of what we know is simply misfiled? And if you can't trust the where behind a memory, can you ever fully trust the what? Destination memory failure. When you forget who you told, you walk into the room with a smirk, ready to drop a clever story. Halfway through, your friend interrupts. "Yeah, you told me this yesterday." You pause. The punchline collapses. The moment evaporates. You were sure this was new. This is destination memory failure, when you remember the message but forget the audience. Your brain holds on to what you meant to say, or what you said, but loses track of to whom, and so you find yourself repeating things, telling the same anecdote to the same person, or worse, not telling something important because you falsely believe you already did. It's not a memory of content that breaks, it's a memory of connection. And we've all been there. You rehearse a thought, maybe even say it out loud in your head. Later, you feel like it was already shared. But was it, or did it just feel shared because you imagined doing it? That blurred line between mental rehearsal and actual action is the breeding ground for this failure. Destination memory is especially vulnerable in fast-paced, socially complex lives. If you're juggling tasks, talking to multiple people, or constantly shifting between contexts, your brain may store the what without logging the who. The intention gets detached from the interaction. And as strange as it sounds, this doesn't only affect casual conversation. It can shape relationships. Forget to thank someone because you think you already did, and it feels like neglect. Repeat a painful story to someone who's already heard it, and it feels like emotional weight you won't let go. Skip an apology because you meant to say it, but never did. Now imagine this on a larger scale. In caregiving, in politics, in therapy. When the memory of telling something carries real consequences, emotional or otherwise, destination memory failure becomes more than a quirk. It becomes a fracture in trust. And the irony, The more confident you are in your social memory, the more dangerous it gets. Because the feeling of having shared something is convincing, the more vivid the memory of the moment you thought about saying it, the more easily your mind checks it off as done. But it wasn't, and that small lapse creates ripples. So next time someone says, "You already told me this," consider how often you've forgotten the flip side, what you never said, and to whom you never said it. Because forgetting what you know is one thing, but forgetting who you gave it to? That's a silence pretending to be memory. Time slice confusion. When moments from different times blend together, you're certain you locked the door. You remember turning the key, feeling the click, checking twice. But later, standing in front of the same door with doubt creeping in, you realize something unsettling. You did lock the door, just not this time. That memory, it's from yesterday or last week. But your mind didn't tell you that. This is time slice confusion, when fragments of different experiences are stitched together and mistaken for a single recent event. It's not that you're forgetting what happened, it's that you're confusing when it happened. The brain pulls a scene from memory, familiar, vivid, comforting, and misplaces it in the timeline. You might think you already replied to that message. You might remember paying a bill you only intended to pay. You might recall a conversation, but it happened with someone else, long ago. Time slice confusion happens because memory isn't a perfect reel. It's a collection of scattered clips. And when you remember something, you're not rewinding a tape, you're reconstructing an experience, piece by piece. And sometimes the pieces don't belong together. Think of it like grabbing random frames from different films and stitching them into a single sequence. It might feel coherent. You recognize the setting, the action seems familiar, but the continuity is broken. In daily life, this can be harmless, mundane. You tell a friend about a movie you just watched, only to realize you saw it 2 years ago. You revisit a memory with nostalgia, only to discover the event never happened that way. But in higher stakes situations, emergency rooms, legal testimony, caregiving, this confusion becomes critical. A person might insist something happened yesterday when it happened months ago, or conflate multiple incidents into one, making it hard to distinguish fact from fusion. Even our emotional memories are vulnerable. You feel like you've had the same argument 100 times. Maybe you have. But maybe your brain is pulling bits from different moments, compiling them into a single exaggerated scene. One memory becomes many, or many become one. Here's a moment we've all had. You walk into a room and suddenly can't remember why, but you remember being in that room before. You start tracing the memory back, only to realize the thing you're remembering happened in a dream, or days ago, or with someone else entirely. That uncertainty, the strange dislocation of time, is time slice confusion in action. And it leaves us with a sobering thought. If we can't always trust the when of our memories, then how stable is the story we tell ourselves? Because when memory slices time into fragments, the past becomes a mosaic of mismatched moments, and the present a puzzle we're always trying to solve. The Reminiscence Bump, why youth echoes louder than the present. You hear a song from when you were 17. Before the first chorus ends, you're back there. Not just remembering, but feeling it. The air, the clothes, the exact emotional weight of a moment decades old. It's not nostalgia, it's something deeper, something anchored. This is the reminiscence bump, a psychological phenomenon where people recall a disproportionate number of memories from adolescence and early adulthood. Ask anyone over 40 to name their most vivid memories, and you'll find a striking pattern: ages 10 to 30 dominate the list. Why? Why do these years glow so brightly, while the rest of life fades into blur? Part of the answer is neurological. During adolescence and young adulthood, the brain is at its peak plasticity. Experiences are more intense, more novel, and more likely to be encoded with vivid emotional detail. First loves, first failures, first freedoms. These aren't just events, they're formative stories. They sculpt the self. And because they shape identity, they don't fade. But there's something else, something stranger. The reminiscence bump isn't just about what you remember. It's about how those memories take on mythic proportions. A party becomes a pivotal turning point. A conversation becomes the voice of destiny. A heartbreak becomes the origin story of who you became. These aren't just memories. They're narrative anchors, the chapters we reread to remember who we are. And here's the paradox. The reminiscence bump isn't necessarily accurate. It's selective. We don't remember more from those years because they were better. We remember more because those memories have become emotionally resonant symbols. Think about it. Why is it easier to recall what your bedroom looked like at age 16 than what you had for lunch last Tuesday? Why can you name the friends you had in college, but not the coworkers you saw this morning? It's not time, it's emotional weight, and it happens globally. Across cultures, across generations, whether you're in Tokyo, Nairobi, or Sao Paulo, those years between youth and adulthood are where the memory map thickens. But there's an unsettling edge to the reminiscence bump, too. It tricks us into believing that who we were is more vivid than who we are now, that life peaked somewhere behind us, and everything since has been drifting into gray. It can freeze identity, trap us in a golden past, or worse, create the illusion that meaning only lives in memory. And yet, these echoes persist. The music, the smells, the way light looked on a certain day in a forgotten summer. They remind us that memory isn't a timeline, it's a constellation. And some stars, once ignited, shine forever brighter. Flashbulb memory distortion. When unforgettable moments lie, you remember exactly where you were. The sky looked strange that day. The silence in the room felt too loud. Someone said something simple like, "Oh no," and just like that, everything changed. It could have been a personal loss, a public tragedy, a world-shifting event. And your memory of it feels crystal clear. You know what you were wearing. You remember who was with you. You can picture the news anchor's face, the way the air felt, the angle of the light. This is known as a flashbulb memory, a vivid, detailed recollection of a shocking or emotional event, seared into the mind like a photograph. It's a term coined to describe how certain memories feel like they've been captured with a mental camera. But here's the twist. They're often wrong. Flashbulb memories feel more accurate than ordinary memories, but they're not. In fact, they're uniquely vulnerable to distortion. Why? Because the feeling of clarity doesn't come from perfect recall. It comes from emotional intensity. The stronger the emotion, the more certain we are of the details. But certainty is not truth. Psychologists have studied this by asking people to record their memories immediately after major events, like 9/11s or the death of a celebrity. Then, months or years later, they ask again. The results are chilling. People swear by their original stories, defend them with conviction, only to discover they've changed. Details have shifted. People were misremembered. The sequence was wrong. But because the moment felt important, the memory feels untouchable. Flashbulb memory distortion reveals something unnerving about the brain. We don't remember reality. We remember what mattered to us emotionally. And over time, we reinforce those memories, not by verifying them, but by repeating them. Each retelling recarves the memory. Each time we share it, we smooth over uncertainties. We fill in gaps. We emphasize drama. And soon, we're not remembering the moment, we're remembering the memory of the moment. You can test this in your own life. Think back to a frozen moment. Try to recall it in granular detail. Then ask someone who was with you. Their version might be different, equally confident, equally flawed. So whose memory is the real one? Maybe none of them. Flashbulb memory distortion reminds us that even our most sacred recollections, the moments we know we'll never forget, might be stories we've carefully rewritten. Because sometimes the clearest memories are just the most deeply believed illusions. Subliminal priming. When invisible nudges shape your choices, you walk into a bakery, not particularly hungry, but within minutes, you're craving cinnamon rolls. You can practically taste them before you even see them, and you don't quite know why. Maybe it was the faint scent drifting from a vent before you opened the door. Maybe it was the warm lighting, or maybe, just maybe, it was a whisper of a word you didn't fully register on a sign outside. Fresh. This is subliminal priming, the subtle, often unnoticed influence that previous exposure has on your perception, judgment, or behavior. Priming happens when your brain gets nudged, gently, quietly, beneath awareness. It's not persuasion, it's not logic, it's a silent cue that unlocks associations already buried in your mind. And the most unnerving part, you don't even realize it's happening. In one famous study, participants were shown a quick flash of words, some related to old age, like wrinkle, Florida, retired. They weren't told the theme. After the test, researchers observed them walking more slowly than a control group. The words had primed their behavior, bypassing conscious thought entirely. Another example. If you're shown the word yellow and then asked to name a fruit, you're more likely to say banana, not because you thought harder, but because your brain was nudged in that direction. Milliseconds before the decision. The effect spills into nearly every part of life. Background music in a store can prime you to buy certain products. Fonts can influence trustworthiness. Colors can alter your sense of urgency. Even the temperature of the room can shift how warmly you perceive another person. And yet, we cling to the belief that our choices are rational, deliberate, self-directed. Subliminal priming challenges that belief. It shows us that we are, to a disturbing extent, programmable. Our minds are constantly scanning for patterns and meanings, so sensitive to cues that even a flicker of an idea can reshape what we want, how we feel, and what we choose. But not all priming is malicious. It can be used for good. Words like cooperate or together can increase generosity in group settings. Images of nature can increase creativity or patience. Priming can make people kinder, braver, even more honest, if the cues are right. And here's the paradox. Once you know you're being primed, it often stops working. Awareness breaks the spell. But how many cues pass unnoticed? How many billboards, background lyrics, casual phrases, or split-second glances have shaped the way you see the world without your permission? Subliminal priming doesn't control you, but it steers you. And if your direction can be shifted by something you didn't even see, then where exactly do your choices begin? Anchoring bias. When your mind clings to the first number, you walk into a store and see a coat priced at $800. You laugh. Who pays that much for a coat? Then you find another one, not far away. It's marked down to $280. Still expensive, but suddenly it seems reasonable. Maybe even a good deal. You didn't compare it to what a coat should cost. You compared it to the first number you saw. That's anchoring bias, the mind's tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information it receives when making decisions, especially numbers, especially under uncertainty. It's not about logic, it's about gravitational pull. The first figure you encounter becomes the mental anchor quietly tugging every thought after it in its direction, even if it's irrelevant, even if you know it's arbitrary. And even when you think you're being objective, you're not. In one classic study, participants spun a wheel rig to land on either 10 or 65. Then they were asked to guess the number of African countries in the UN. Those who landed on 65 gave much higher estimates. The number on the wheel had no relationship to the question, but it primed their minds. The bias goes far beyond trivia. In courtrooms, higher sentencing demands lead to harsher penalties, even when judges admit the number came from a random source. In salary negotiations, the first offer, however ridiculous, frames the entire conversation. In real estate, listing prices dramatically shape what buyers think a house is worth. Anchoring doesn't just distort external decisions, It warps internal reasoning. Ever reflect on a past version of yourself and think, well, at least I'm not like that anymore? That old identity becomes an anchor, not because it's relevant now, but because it's the starting point your mind clings to when measuring growth. Or consider self-worth. If someone once told you you're not leadership material, that phrase might become an anchor even if you've since proved it wrong. Anchors don't have to be numbers. They can be moments, labels, throwaway comments that calcify into assumptions. Anchoring bias feeds on simplicity. It gives your brain a shortcut, a reference point, something to latch onto when complexity overwhelms. But here's the danger. Once the anchor is set, adjustment is shallow. We rarely move far enough from it. We underestimate, overpay, misjudge. We cling, not because it makes sense, but because it feels like a center. And that raises the deeper question. What anchors have been quietly steering your life? What numbers, names, or ideas planted themselves early and never let go? Because to escape an anchor, you have to notice it first. And most of them live just beneath awareness, shaping every choice that follows. Choice blindness. When you justify decisions you didn't make, you're asked to choose between two photos, two faces. Which one is more attractive? You point. Quickly, instinctively. The researcher nods, turns the cards over, and hands you the one you supposedly picked. Then asks, why did you choose this one? And you explain, confidently. You mention the eyes or the smile, or something about the energy. But there's a twist. The photo they handed you isn't the one you chose. And you didn't notice. This is choice blindness, a cognitive glitch where people fail to detect a mismatch between their intended choice and the outcome presented to them. And more than that, they go on to defend a decision they never made. It's not just a party trick, it's a profound crack in the illusion of self-awareness. In the original experiments conducted by psychologists Peter Johansson and Lars Hall, participants were asked to choose between faces, political statements, or even preferences in taste tests. Occasionally, their actual choice was secretly swapped. Most participants didn't catch it, and when asked why they made that choice, they offered justifications passionate, detailed, sincere. The findings were startling. We don't just make decisions, we construct stories about why we made them, even if those decisions aren't ours. And this effect doesn't live only in the lab. Imagine you vote for a political candidate, only to later learn you misread the ballot. You might still find yourself defending your choice, because once your mind locks onto a narrative, it doesn't let go easily. Or picture picking a restaurant from a friend's suggestion, believing it was your idea all along. You begin to justify it. I love this place. It's exactly my vibe. You rewrite history to fit a feeling. Choice blindness doesn't mean we're gullible. It means we are narrative creatures. We need coherence. And when coherence is threatened, when our past and present don't align, we smooth it over with stories. We retcon. We stitch inconsistencies together without noticing the seams. It raises an unsettling question. How many of our decisions are real, and how many are accepted, absorbed, and rationalized after the fact? How often do we reverse engineer our values to fit what we've already done? Choice blindness suggests the self is more fragile than we imagine. Not a stable driver at the wheel, but a skilled editor cutting and rearranging scenes to make the film feel like it makes sense. So the next time you feel certain about why you chose something, pause. Ask yourself, did I choose this, or did I just become the person who would have chosen it? Because sometimes the line between decision and explanation is drawn after the ink has dried. The illusory truth effect, when repetition becomes reality. You hear a claim once, people only use 10% of their brain. It sounds odd, but you don't question it. A few weeks later, you hear it again, on a podcast maybe, or in a movie. And suddenly, it starts to feel true. Not because you verified it, not because the source was credible, but because it's familiar, This is the illusory truth effect, the cognitive bias where repeated statements are more likely to be perceived as true, regardless of their actual validity. Put simply, the more often you hear something, the more likely you are to believe it. It's not a flaw in intelligence, it's a feature of efficiency. The brain, flooded with information, needs shortcuts. One of the most powerful is fluency, how easily a statement is processed, and repetition makes things easier to process. So the mind starts to confuse ease with accuracy. It happens quietly. A myth is repeated in a casual conversation. A statistic is mentioned on the news, wrong, but confidently. A phrase circles social media, sounding right, feeling right. And over time, exposure becomes endorsement. This is why propaganda works, why rumors spread, why misinformation thrives, not because it's persuasive, but because it's persistent. Even when we know a statement is false, hearing it over and over chips away at our skepticism. The critical mind says, wait, that can't be true. But the subconscious whispers, still, it sounds familiar. Advertisers use it. Politicians depend on it. Say something simply. Say it often. Watch it root itself in public belief. But it doesn't just affect facts. It shapes identity. If, growing up, you were told you weren't good at math, once, then twice, then endlessly, it might have settled in. Not because it was objectively true, but because the repetition forged belief. Or take self-worth. Repeated criticisms, even subtle, repeated doubts, can echo louder than single moments of praise. Over time, those echoes rewrite your sense of who you are. The illusory truth effect turns the mind into a hall of mirrors where echoes pretend to be origins. And there's another twist. Even when the truth is finally revealed, it doesn't always undo the lie. Research shows that corrections often fail to erase the illusion. The lie leaves an emotional footprint. It feels true, and feeling, for the brain, is often enough. So what can we trust? Not repetition, not familiarity. Only the slow, deliberate work of asking, where did this idea come from? Why do I believe it? Do I believe it, or do I just recognize it? Because if exposure alone can manufacture truth, then knowing something isn't the same as understanding it. And in a world of endless noise, the scariest illusions aren't the ones that deceive us once. They're the ones that whisper again and again, until we stop noticing the whisper at all. The mere exposure effect, when familiarity feels like affection. You pass by a coffee shop every morning on your way to work. You've never been inside. You've never even looked at the menu. But one day, when you need a break, that's the place you choose. Not because it's better, not because it's closer, but because it feels right. That's the mere exposure effect, the strange tendency for people to develop a preference for things simply because they're familiar with them. Even when that familiarity is weak, meaningless, or entirely accidental. It's not about quality, it's about comfort. Your brain is constantly scanning the world for threats. In a sea of uncertainty, the familiar becomes a safe harbor. It doesn't matter whether it's useful, beautiful, or even true. If you've seen it before, your mind marks it as less dangerous, and less dangerous becomes more likable. This effect runs deeper than we realize. It's why we tend to prefer songs we've already heard, even if we didn't like them at first. It's why political candidates with recognizable names have an advantage regardless of policies. It's why brands spend fortunes making sure their logos, slogans, and colors appear everywhere. Repetition becomes affection. In one study, participants were shown a series of faces. Some appeared multiple times, others only once. Later, when asked which they liked best, the repeated faces ranked higher, even though the exposure had been brief and the expressions neutral. It even works with nonsense. Show someone a made-up word like glorp a few times and then offer it alongside another unfamiliar word like zintor, and they'll lean toward glorp, not because it means anything, but because it doesn't feel like a stranger. The mere exposure effect explains a lot about human behavior. Why we revisit the same vacation spots. Why we order the same dish. Why we reread the same stories, even when we know how they end. It also exposes a vulnerability, because familiarity can trick us into seeing quality where there is none. It's why misinformation thrives. A false claim repeated enough times begins to feel obvious. It's why toxic relationships are hard to leave. A harmful pattern can still feel safer than an unknown alternative. Even attraction is affected. Studies show that people rate others as more attractive when they see them more often, even from a distance, even without interaction. Familiarity doesn't breed contempt. It breeds comfort. And comfort in the mind often disguises itself as truth. This bias isn't inherently bad. In uncertain worlds, we need shortcuts. But it begs a difficult question. How many of your preferences are truly yours? And how many were planted quietly over time by nothing more than repetition? Because what you like isn't always what's best. Sometimes it's just what showed up first, and then kept showing up. The name-letter effect. When your ego hides in plain sight, you're filling out a survey, asked to rate your favorite letters of the alphabet. Odd question, you think. Who has a favorite letter? But without realizing it, you give higher scores to the letters in your name, especially the first one. It doesn't feel like bias. It feels like instinct. That's the name-letter effect. The strange tendency for people to prefer the letters in their own name, particularly their initials, over other letters, even when the letters are presented without meaning, even when the preference offers no advantage. It sounds trivial, a psychological quirk, a party fact. But it hints at something deeper. Because this effect isn't just about letters, it's about identity. Your name is the most intimately repeated sound in your life. You've heard it since birth. It shaped how others addressed you, how you imagined yourself. And over time, even the components of that name, the letters, the shapes, the sounds, become subtly sacred. This creates a kind of hidden gravity, a quiet attraction to anything that mirrors the self. In one experiment, researchers found people were more likely to live in cities that shared their initials. Louis was more likely to live in Louisville. Dennis was more likely to become a dentist. Laura leaned toward law, Carl toward carpentry. It's called implicit egotism, the unconscious pull we feel toward things that resemble us. It's why we're drawn to brands that echo our names, why we gravitate toward partners whose initials feel oddly familiar, why people sometimes donate more to hurricanes that start with the same letter as their name. Of course, not every Louis lives in Louisville. And not every dentist is named Dennis. But the data, when scaled across populations, shows a subtle but persistent tilt. And here's where it gets strange. Even when we consciously reject the idea that we're biased, the effect remains. We still lean toward the familiar, even if it's arbitrary, even if it's just a letter, because the self isn't just a story we tell, it's a lens we look through. And sometimes, that lens filters reality in ways we never notice. But the implications go further. If something as simple as a shared letter can influence preferences, how much more do we bend toward things that flatter or echo our sense of self? How many of our choices are less about logic and more about subtle reflections? The name-letter effect doesn't control you, but it's a reminder. Your ego leaves fingerprints in unexpected places. So the next time something feels right for reasons you can't explain, ask yourself if it's truly the thing, or just a shadow of your own name smiling back. The Rosenthal Effect. When expectations shape reality. A teacher is handed a sealed list at the start of the school year. Inside the names of a few students marked as bloomers, those expected to show exceptional intellectual growth. The teacher doesn't open the list. Not at first, but just knowing it exists shifts something. She watches a little more closely, offers more patience, smiles more often. And the students? They begin to change. By the end of the year, the bloomers, hand-picked at random, are outperforming their peers. This is the Rosenthal effect, also called the Pygmalion effect, a psychological phenomenon where higher expectations lead to improved performance. And the inverse is just as powerful. When expectations are low, outcomes often suffer. The idea began with rats. In the 1960s, psychologist Robert Rosenthal gave students rats and told them some were specially bred for intelligence. In truth, all the rats were the same, but the students who believed they had smart rats treated them differently, handled them more gently, trained them more persistently. And those rats indeed performed better in mazes. What the handler believed became true. When Rosenthal extended the study to classrooms with real children, the results stunned the world. Teachers were told certain students showed signs of intellectual spurting. The names were chosen at random, yet those students made significantly more academic gains over the year. The effect had nothing to do with ability. It had everything to do with belief. Expectations influence tone of voice, body language, enthusiasm, and subtle choices we don't even realize we're making. And these micro-behaviors accumulate, nudging the outcome toward the prophecy. But it doesn't stop with teachers and rats. Coaches expect more from certain athletes. Managers believe in specific employees. Parents unconsciously signal their trust or doubt to their children. And people rise or fall accordingly. Even self-perception isn't immune. Believe you'll fail, and you'll likely withdraw effort early. Believe you belong, and your presence becomes firmer. The Rosenthal effect is quiet. It whispers. It changes reality not by force, but by framing. And it reveals something both beautiful and dangerous. Our minds don't just observe the world, they help construct it. So ask yourself, whose potential are you shaping right now without realizing it? Whose flame are you feeding or starving with your silent expectations? And equally, what have others expected of you that became your truth? Because sometimes what we call destiny was just someone else's belief, folded into the way they looked at us. The contagion heuristic, when touch transfers, meaning you're offered two identical glasses of water. One was poured fresh. The other, just moments ago, was poured into a glass that had briefly held a sterilized cockroach. Everything is clean. No residue. No smell. But most people hesitate, and many refuse the second glass altogether. This is the contagion heuristic, the deep, irrational belief that the essence of something can be transferred through contact, even when logically it shouldn't. It's why people recoil from a perfectly clean sweater if told it once belonged to a murderer. It's why food loses appeal if it's been contaminated by something symbolic like a hair or an insect, even if removed instantly and safely. It's not about germs. It's not hygiene. It's meaning, and we treat meaning as if it can spread like a virus. This bias runs so deep, it overrides reason. In one study, participants were asked to try on a sweater. They rated it as warm, cozy, and comforting. But when told it had belonged to a serial killer, their reaction shifted instantly. Some refused to wear it. Others claimed it felt different, as if evil could cling to fabric. Even positive associations work this way. A sweater worn by a beloved celebrity feels special. People want to own it, touch it, keep it. Not because the material changed, but because we believe something of the person remains. It's magical thinking in disguise. The contagion heuristic is a relic of evolutionary caution. Avoiding spoiled food, poisonous substances, or disease-bearing contact was essential for survival. But evolution doesn't easily distinguish between biological threats and symbolic ones. So we avoid the apple that touched the floor, or hesitate before drinking from a stranger's glass, even if every part of us knows it's safe. And in modern life, this bias spills into morality. We treat objects associated with wrongdoers as tainted. We fear their energy, their aura. We resist gifts from people who've hurt us, even if the gift is thoughtful. We shun homes where crimes occurred, not because the walls hold evidence, but because they don't feel right. We even imbue places with spiritual residue, blessings, curses, sacredness, all based on what touched them before. The contagion heuristic reveals something profound. We don't just think with logic, we think with stories, with symbols, with unseen meanings that cling to the edges of experience. And while this can lead to irrational fear, it also hints at something beautiful, that we feel the history of things. That touch is more than physical. That meaning to us is not just held in words, but in what has brushed against what. So the next time you hesitate to drink from the tainted glass, ask yourself what you're really recoiling from. Because sometimes what we fear is not what's in the thing, but what we believe might still be whispering from it. The false consensus effect. When we mistake our minds for the world, you're at a dinner table with friends, casually sharing your opinion about a recent event. You speak with confidence, assuming everyone sees it the same way. But when someone disagrees, gently, even curiously, it startles you. How could they not see what seems so obvious? This is the false consensus effect, the cognitive bias that leads us to overestimate how much others share our beliefs, behaviors, and preferences. We assume our way of thinking is more common than it is, and we're often surprised or even disturbed when the world doesn't mirror us back. The roots of this bias are subtle but deeply human. Our minds crave social validation. If we believe most people agree with us, it strengthens our sense of belonging and reduces internal conflict. And so, without realizing it, we unconsciously project our views onto others. Studies have illustrated the effect in countless forms. When people are asked whether they would wear a sandwich board advertising a product, those who agree tend to assume most people would do the same. Those who refuse believe their choice is equally common. The same happens with opinions on politics, morality, art, even trivia. We don't just believe we're right, we believe we're normal. Part of this illusion comes from the environments we build around ourselves. We curate our social circles, follow like-minded voices, and engage in conversations that reinforce our worldview. These echo chambers, both offline and online, deepen the illusion of consensus. When every voice you hear sounds like your own, disagreement feels jarring, almost threatening. But this bias can also isolate us. When we assume our perspective is universal, we stop listening. We reduce others to outliers or misunderstandings. And when disagreements arise, we interpret them not as differences in perspective, but as signs of ignorance, irrationality, or hostility. The false consensus effect also plays a quiet role in conflict. If we believe our position is shared by most reasonable people, then anyone who diverges must be unreasonable. This can harden opinions, polarize groups, and make compromise feel like betrayal. Even our memory is shaped by this bias. When we recall past events, we often imagine others experienced them as we did, even if they didn't. It's not a lie, it's a simplification, a way for the mind to smooth over the complex diversity of human experience. And yet, there's a strange comfort in realizing how different we all are. Not a threat, but a kind of release. Because if your thoughts aren't echoed by everyone else, then maybe theirs aren't either. Maybe no single perspective is how things are. Maybe the world is wider than your frame, and that's not a flaw in your perception, but a feature of being human. Recognizing the false consensus effect isn't about abandoning conviction. It's about making room for others to exist beside us without threatening who we are. Room for truth to be plural. Room for uncertainty to be not just tolerated, but welcomed. Because the moment we accept that our thoughts aren't the default, that they're just one lens among many, we begin to see more clearly, not just the world outside, but the assumptions within. The prejudice habit loop. When bias becomes automatic, you walk into a room and instantly notice someone, how they dress, how they speak, how they carry themselves. Within seconds, without effort, your brain makes a quiet judgment. You don't intend to. You might not even be aware of it, but something clicks. And from that moment on, everything you observe about them is filtered through that silent verdict. This is how prejudice often works, not as hatred or overt hostility, but as a habit, a loop, a pattern of thought and reaction that repeats itself so seamlessly, it feels invisible. The prejudice habit loop describes the way biases, once formed, become reinforced through repetition. Like any habit, it begins with a trigger, a detail that stands out, a category the brain recognizes, a stereotype that's been culturally reinforced. The response follows automatically, a judgment, an expectation, a gut feeling, and that response gets rewarded. It helps the brain make quick decisions. It reduces ambiguity. It feels right, even when it's wrong. The more this loop runs, the stronger it becomes. And this strength doesn't require malice. Most people who carry bias don't think of themselves as prejudiced. In fact, the loop is strongest when it hides behind the illusion of objectivity. We assume our impressions are based on experience, logic, or instinct. But often, they're just rehearsed reactions wearing the mask of reason. This loop is fueled by what psychologists call confirmation bias. When we expect a certain kind of behavior, we're more likely to notice it and less likely to see the contradictions. A person who fits a stereotype gets remembered. One who doesn't gets forgotten. Over time, the loop edits reality to support its own narrative. Breaking it isn't easy. You can't just decide not to be biased. You have to unlearn the reward. You have to pause between the trigger and the response. That pause, brief, intentional, difficult, is where change begins. It starts by noticing when you make a snap judgment, when you assume, before knowing, when you catch yourself drawing conclusions faster than the facts allow. And then, rather than scolding yourself, you slow down. You ask, where did that thought come from? Who taught it to me? Is it true or just familiar? The goal isn't perfection, it's awareness. Because prejudice isn't just a social issue, it's a cognitive pattern. And like all patterns, it can be rewired, but it takes repetition, effort, humility, not grand gestures, but small acts of mental honesty repeated daily, in silence, without applause. The prejudice habit loop thrives in the background. It speaks in quick glances, first impressions, lowered expectations, and tiny hesitations. But when you become conscious of it, its grip loosens, and something remarkable begins to happen. You start to see people as they are, not as categories, not as symbols, not as reflections of your own assumptions, but as complex, contradictory, unpredictable beings, just like you. And in that seeing, the loop breaks. Not with noise, not with rage, but with the quiet decision to look again. The flow state paradox, losing yourself to become more yourself. You're doing something you love, maybe painting, coding, running, or writing. The task is just difficult enough to challenge you, but not so hard it overwhelms you. Minutes pass, then hours. Time becomes elastic. Thoughts quiet down. The usual chatter, worries, doubts, self-consciousness fades into the background. You're not thinking about what you're doing. You're just doing. This is what psychologists call flow, a state of heightened focus and immersion where action and awareness merge. It's often described as peak experience, the mind operating at full capacity with effortless precision. Yet the more people describe it, the more paradoxical it becomes. Because in flow, you feel fully alive, yet absent. You perform at your best, yet with no awareness of performing. You feel most like yourself, while forgetting who you are. This is the flow state paradox, the strange truth that to become more whole, we must in some way vanish. Flow isn't about trying harder, it's about surrender. It emerges when you stop controlling and start being, when skill meets challenge and awareness narrows to a single point of focus. The self, the part of you constantly evaluating, narrating, managing, gets quiet. That silence is the doorway. And yet, it's not passive. Flow isn't zoning out. It's not mindless. It's mindful in the purest sense. You are flooded with clarity, but stripped of commentary. The usual inner monologue dissolves. You don't think, I'm doing well. You just continue doing, with no need to assess. And when it ends, there's often a soft grief. You come back. You remember your name, your body, your obligations. But something has shifted. You were gone. And yet somehow, more you than before. Some describe it as spiritual, others as neurological. It's both, and neither. Flow has been found in athletes, artists, surgeons, musicians, even factory workers. It's not tied to the activity, but to the match between the task's difficulty and the individual's skill. Too easy, and you grow bored. Too hard, and you become anxious. But in that narrow middle, just beyond your comfort zone, lies transcendence. What makes the paradox even stranger is that flow isn't motivated by reward. In fact, rewards can pull you out of it. When you're in flow, you're not doing the thing for a grade, a paycheck, or praise. You're doing it because doing it is the reward. It's autotelic, an end in itself. And this is why so many seek it. Not just for productivity or achievement, but for a glimpse of something beyond the usual mind. A state where we are neither pushing nor pausing, just moving, like water down a slope, like breath across strings. In flow, we forget ourselves. And in forgetting, we return to something purer. Not the self that is watched and weighed and worn thin, but the self that simply is. Hypnagogic hallucinations, the mind's last flickers before sleep. You're lying in bed, eyes closed, body still. The room is quiet, the lights are off, and your thoughts begin to slow. Then suddenly, without warning, a voice whispers your name. A figure appears in the corner of your vision. A sound echoes from nowhere. For a moment, it feels utterly real. You jolt awake, heart racing. But there's no one there. You weren't dreaming. You hadn't even fallen asleep yet, but something had already crossed over. These are hypnagogic hallucinations, the vivid, sometimes bizarre perceptions that emerge in the fragile space between wakefulness and sleep. They are not dreams. They happen before sleep begins, during the transition from conscious awareness to unconscious processing. And they reveal something profound about the instability of the mind as it lets go of the day. For some, these experiences are fleeting, a random flash of light, a phantom sound, a falling sensation. For others, they're immersive and unsettling, entire scenes, shadowy figures, voices that don't belong to any memory. They don't follow logic, they're fragments, shards, surreal impressions unbound from narrative. And because you're not fully asleep, they can feel terrifyingly real. What's happening here is a kind of neurological handover. As the brain begins to shift from active wakefulness into sleep, certain areas begin to power down, while others activate in strange and unpredictable ways. The visual cortex may start firing spontaneously, generating images with no external input. The auditory system may echo recent sounds or imagined speech. The boundaries of the self begin to loosen. And in this state, without the full weight of rational filtering, the mind is free to wander, sometimes into wonder, sometimes into fear. These hallucinations are more common than most realize. Up to 70% of people experience them at some point. Stress, irregular sleep, or exhaustion can make them more intense. In some cases, they're mistaken for supernatural encounters or early signs of psychosis, but in truth, they're simply part of the complex choreography of consciousness shutting down. Interestingly, the content of hypnagogic hallucinations often reflects the residue of thought. A person who feels watched might see an intruder. Someone anxious might hear a warning. The mind, half asleep, paints its concerns across the canvas of fading awareness. And yet, not all of these experiences are frightening. Some are astonishingly beautiful, floating lights, ethereal music, sudden clarity, or creative insight. Many artists, writers, and inventors have mined this state for inspiration. It is, in a strange way, a bridge to the subconscious, a place where the rational mind surrenders and the symbolic begins to speak. What makes hypnagogic hallucinations so unsettling is their ambiguity. They don't quite belong to waking life, but they're not dreams either. They are liminal experiences that happen between categories, at the edge of awareness where the mind no longer knows which world it's in. And that edge, fragile as it is, reveals how delicate our grasp on reality can be. You didn't move. Nothing touched you. And yet something entered, not from outside, but from within. Because the door to the unconscious doesn't swing open all at once. It creaks. It whispers. And sometimes, just before it opens fully, it lets something slip through. Time dilation from fear. When every second stretches into forever, you're standing at the edge of a tall cliff. Your foot slips. In that instant, barely more than a heartbeat, the world explodes into detail. You see the ground below, sharp and distant. You feel the wind against your skin, the twist of your stomach, the tightening of your throat. Thoughts race, not in a line but all at once, like time is no longer a stream but a flood. Later, when it's over, you swear it lasted longer than it did. 5 seconds felt like 15. Your memory stretched the moment into something elastic, surreal. This is time dilation from fear, the strange phenomenon where terrifying or high-stakes experiences seem to slow down time. Not because time itself changes, but because your perception of it does. It's easy to believe that during intense fear, the brain somehow speeds up, like flipping into a higher gear, and in some ways, it does. The amygdala, the brain's fear center, goes into overdrive. Adrenaline floods your system, your senses sharpen, attention narrows. You absorb more information in less time. But that's not the full story. What actually stretches time is memory. During life-threatening or high-emotion events, the brain takes in so many details, so much sensory and emotional data, that it encodes those memories more densely than usual. When you look back on it, it feels longer because there's more there to recall. The mind interprets the richness of memory as an indicator of duration. It's not that time slowed in the moment. It's that later, the moment feels vast. This illusion isn't just theoretical. Researchers have studied it by throwing participants off tall platforms in controlled, harnessed freefalls and asking them to judge how long the fall lasted. Almost universally, people reported that the fall felt longer than it actually was. But their ability to perceive time during the event, like tracking a rapidly flashing display, didn't improve. They didn't actually process more frames per second, they just remembered more frames. Fear warps the narrative. It shifts how we encode, and therefore how we reconstruct, and that shift can linger, shaping our relationship to trauma, risk, and memory itself. A car crash, a near drowning, a sudden confrontation. These moments often stick because they feel carved into a slower, heavier timeline. But there's something deeper here. Time, we assume, is objective, measurable, immutable. Yet our experience of it is wildly fluid, bending with emotion, stretching with meaning, collapsing under routine. In boredom, seconds drag. In joy, they vanish. In danger, they multiply, expanding, as if your mind is trying to hold on. Perhaps that's what time dilation from fear truly is. The mind's desperate attempt to catch everything before it's too late. A survival mechanism etched not into physics, but into perception. And once you've felt it, truly felt it, you'll never look at a ticking clock the same way again. Because sometimes, forever can happen in a blink. Blindsight, when the eyes lie, and the mind still sees. Imagine a man walks into a room filled with furniture. He doesn't pause. He moves around a chair, sidesteps a table, avoids the wall without ever bumping into it. But there's something strange. His eyes are open, yet he insists he's blind. And he's not lying. He genuinely believes he can't see anything at all. This is blind sight, one of the most unsettling and counterintuitive phenomena in all of psychology. It occurs when someone loses conscious visual perception due to damage in the brain, most often in the primary visual cortex, but somehow in very specific ways, they can still respond to visual information. They can't describe what's in front of them. They'll tell you, with full confidence, that they see nothing. But if asked to point to a light, avoid an obstacle, or guess the direction of a moving object, they perform well above chance, as if something inside them can still see, even when they cannot. It's a fracture between awareness and ability. Blind sight forces us to reconsider what seeing really is. We often think of vision as a unified experience, a single, smooth process of opening our eyes and taking in the world. But the brain doesn't work that way. It's a collection of pathways, modules, parallel processors. When the visual cortex, the area responsible for conscious sight, is damaged, other pathways remain, primitive ones. Older systems that evolved before we could see in the way we now understand it. One such pathway leads through the superior colliculus, an ancient part of the brain that helps with reflexes and motion detection. It's not capable of forming detailed images, but it knows enough to guide a hand, dodge a shape, or track movement in the periphery. This is what's operating in blind sight. Vision without vision. Awareness without awareness. And it doesn't just challenge our definition of sight, it challenges our definition of consciousness. If a person can process something without knowing it, without feeling it, how much of your own life is being guided by signals beneath the surface? How many of your choices are shaped by things you can't name? How much of your perception is edited before it ever reaches your awareness? Blind sight is more than a clinical curiosity. It's a mirror turned inward, showing us the split between what the brain knows and what the mind allows in. Because sometimes what you see isn't what you see, and sometimes what guides you doesn't ask permission first. You move around the world assuming your senses are whole, but deep inside, the machinery is layered and strange. Some of it watches without telling you. Some of it decides without asking you. And some of it, if damaged, reveals just how much was never truly in your hands to begin with. Hyperphantasia. When the mind paints with light, close your eyes. Now picture an apple. Not just the idea of one, but its color, its texture, its weight in your hand. Can you see the light glinting on its skin? Can you almost smell the tartness, feel the coolness, imagine the first bite? For some, this apple appears vividly, as if it's hovering just behind the eyelids, almost real. For others, the space is blank. The apple is a thought, not an image. But for a rare few, the apple blazes like fire. Not faint, not ghostly, but radiant. So vivid, it seems impossible that it isn't real. This is hyperphantasia, the phenomenon of having an extraordinarily rich and lifelike imagination, particularly in the realm of mental imagery, where most people see a foggy outline in their mind's eye. The hyperphantasic sees a world, not metaphorically, literally. They can replay memories with cinematic precision. They can visualize imaginary creatures in full detail. They can rotate shapes, replay conversations, even rehearse entire days in their minds, as if watching a film. And while this might sound like a superpower, it comes with complexities. For one, it's overwhelming. To recall a traumatic moment with hyperphantasia is to relive it viscerally, not as an echo, but as a return. To imagine something frightening is to conjure it in full color. Even dreams bleed into reality. The line between inner world and outer world becomes whisper-thin. And yet, this vividness also fuels extraordinary creativity. Artists who can see their paintings before the first stroke. Writers who watch their characters move, gesture, cry. Architects who mentally build structures, turn them, walk through them before pen meets paper. It's a gift, but it isolates. Most people don't understand what it's like to live with a mind that won't quiet, that floods every thought with light and shape and sound. and there's a darker edge. Hyperphantasia can accelerate anxiety. Catastrophizing becomes a movie you can't turn off. It can feed obsessions, fuel perfectionism, amplify grief. Because when the mind is this vivid, every fear has form. Every loss has a face. Every hope feels close enough to touch and yet remains just out of reach. And then there's the question of control. Who chooses what appears in the mind's eye? Are you the painter? Or is your imagination painting you? We think of imagination as gentle, passive, a soft kind of dreaming. But for the hyperphantastic, it's a force. It shapes memory. It shapes desire. It shapes identity itself. Because when your inner world is this bright, sometimes it blinds. Maladaptive daydreaming. When fantasy becomes a second life, you're walking to the store, but in your mind, you're somewhere else entirely. You're giving a speech to an admiring crowd, or caught in a dramatic romance, or avenging some injustice in a world built entirely by your own imagination. Your feet move through the real world, but your thoughts, they're elsewhere. Not drifting, not aimless, structured, epic, addictive. And when you finally arrive at the store, at work, at dinner, you feel something strange, a kind of dislocation, a tug, like you've just left behind a place more vivid, more alive than the one you're in now. This is maladaptive daydreaming, a psychological phenomenon where elaborate and immersive fantasy worlds become so compelling that they begin to interfere with a person's real life. It's not simple distraction. It's not just imagination. It's a second existence, often rich, detailed, and emotionally satisfying, constructed entirely within the mind. For those who experience it, the daydreams aren't occasional. They're constant, sometimes hours a day, spurred by music, boredom, trauma, or even just walking in rhythm. And within these imagined worlds, people live alternate versions of themselves. Smarter, braver, more loved, more powerful. Everything real life is not. And that's the core of it. Maladaptive daydreaming often begins as escape from loneliness, from rejection, from grief, from realities too heavy to bear or too hollow to endure. In the fantasy, you're understood, celebrated. In the fantasy, things make sense. But over time, the dream becomes the trap. The real world, messy, slow, full of disappointment, starts to pale. Relationships fray, responsibilities slip, and even when people want to stop, they can't. The inner world has become more rewarding than anything outside it. It's a form of psychological dissociation, not pathological in every case, but disruptive enough that many who live with it feel ashamed, confused, and alone. Because maladaptive daydreaming isn't officially recognized in most diagnostic manuals, it exists in a gray space, somewhere between coping mechanism and addiction. But maybe what's most haunting about it isn't the escapism, it's the longing, the desperate wish that the story in your mind could be the one you inhabit, that the person you imagine being is who you really are, that the world inside you might finally be enough. And maybe in that longing we see something all too human, because everyone daydreams. But for some, the dream becomes a life, and waking up feels like loss. Autoscopic hallucinations, seeing yourself from the outside. You're sitting quietly, nothing strange, nothing frightening. Then, suddenly, something shifts. You look up, and there you are, standing across the room. Not a reflection, not a dream. You, your posture, your clothes, your expression, frozen in time, watching you back. This is autoscopic hallucination, a rare and deeply unsettling experience where a person sees a visual double of themselves, often from a third-person perspective. Unlike an out-of-body experience where you feel like you've left your body, here you remain inside yourself, but also witness yourself as if from the outside. The word autoscopy means seeing oneself, And when it happens, it tears something fundamental, the sense of self as a single anchored identity. Suddenly, you're not just you, you're also an observer of you. The split is silent, but it runs deep. People who've experienced this describe it with eerie clarity. I saw myself standing near the door. My body sat still, but I watched it blink. It was me, but it wasn't me. These episodes can last seconds or stretch into minutes. They may come with confusion, fear, even awe. Sometimes the double mimics you. Sometimes it moves independently. It might look real, or ghost-like, or somehow hollow. Autoscopic hallucinations are often associated with neurological issues, particularly disturbances in the temporal-parietal junction of the brain, which is involved in integrating multisensory information about the body's position in space. When this system falters, the brain can no longer maintain the single narrative of "I am here in this body." Instead, it produces a double. But beyond the biology, there's a psychological dimension that's harder to grasp. What does it mean to see yourself outside of yourself? Not in metaphor, but in form. There's a long, strange history of this phenomenon in literature, folklore, and myth. In Norse culture, a vargur was a ghostly double that appeared before the person themselves arrived. An omen, in many cultures, seeing your own doppelganger was thought to signal death. Even in modern storytelling, doubles evoke dread. They represent something uncanny, something broken, as if identity, when duplicated, becomes monstrous. Yet in psychology, this doubling touches something else. A fracture in self-perception. A crack between the experiencer and the body. A moment when the brain forgets how to be whole. For those who've lived through it, the effect is lasting. Even after the vision fades, the memory lingers, like the air still charged after lightning. A reminder that consciousness is not as stable, not as unified as we like to believe. You are a single person, a single point of view, until you're not. And in that moment of division, you are both the subject and the object, the puppet and the puppeteer. And reality begins to ripple. Because if you can see yourself, what else might be watching? Alice in Wonderland syndrome. When the world bends around you, you reach for a cup of coffee, but your hand feels a mile long. The cup itself? Tiny, like it belongs in a dollhouse. Your feet press against the floor, yet it feels far away, like you're hovering. Your voice echoes strangely in your head, and the room, it's tilting, breathing, shifting shape. But everything around you is still. The world hasn't changed. You have. This is Alice in Wonderland syndrome, a rare neurological condition named after Lewis Carroll's famous tale, in which Alice shrinks, grows, and navigates a reality that warps without warning. For those who experience it, perception becomes untrustworthy. Objects seem to swell or shrink. Time stretches or collapses. Body parts feel enormous or vanish entirely from awareness. It's not imagination. It's not hallucination. It's a full-bodied distortion of sensory processing, one that blurs the lines between what is real and what is merely experienced. Most commonly, it strikes during childhood or adolescence, though adults can suffer from it too. It's often associated with migraines, epilepsy, brain infections, or even moments of extreme fatigue. Sometimes it lasts minutes, sometimes hours, and in those moments, the world becomes unmoored. People with AIWS report that their legs feel the size of tree trunks, that voices sound underwater, that their sense of distance collapses, rooms seem too vast, ceilings too low. Even the passage of time can break down, turning seconds into syrup, and yet they know it's not real. They know their hands aren't truly ballooning. They know the hallway isn't actually stretching like taffy, but the knowing doesn't help. It doesn't stop the fear. Because how do you trust your senses again once they've betrayed you? There's something uniquely disorienting about perceptual distortion, not because it causes pain, but because it severs the most basic contract we have with reality, that what we see can be believed. And when that contract breaks, it leaves you unanchored. Some have described it as psychedelic, others as horrifying, but always it's isolating. How do you explain that your fingers feel like snakes? That your own voice is foreign? That the world is wrong? But perhaps what makes Alice in Wonderland syndrome so haunting isn't the size changes or warped spaces. It's what it reveals. That perception is not passive. That the world we think we move through, the solid, stable world, is stitched together by the brain second by second. And if the stitching frays, reality comes apart at the seams. For a moment, you are Alice, falling, shrinking, growing, trying to hold on to yourself while everything else bends. And just when you think you've landed, another ripple comes. Another mirror cracks. The observer effect in mind, changing just by looking inward. You pause in the mirror, not to fix your hair, not to admire yourself, just to look. And suddenly, something flickers. You become aware of being aware, noticing that you're noticing, as if your mind has turned around to face itself, and in doing so, something fundamental has changed. This is not the well-known observer effect from quantum physics, where particles behave differently when measured. But in psychology and consciousness, a similar idea takes shape. The observer effect in mind refers to how the very act of observing your thoughts, feelings, or behaviors can alter them. Not by force, not by decision, but by attention alone. You feel anxious, but then you notice your anxiety. You label it, you track it, and without doing anything else, it softens. Not gone, but transformed by observation. This effect shows up across countless domains of mental life. In mindfulness practice, it's foundational. The moment you observe a thought without judgment, it begins to lose its grip. In behavioral science, merely knowing you're being watched can shift behavior. People become more generous, more cautious, more aligned with social norms. But the phenomenon goes deeper. Experiments have shown that even being reminded of yourself, say by sitting in front of a mirror, can change the way you make decisions. People cheat less on tests. They choose options that align more closely with their internal values. Why? Because they're being watched, not by others, but by themselves. It's as if self-awareness summons a kind of invisible audience, one that nudges, shapes, and refines our actions in real time. But there's a stranger dimension to all this. Because the observer isn't separate from the self, you are both the actor and the witness, both the stream of thought and the one watching the current. And this duality creates paradox. When you try to just be, you become self-conscious. When you try to perform naturally, you trip over the performance. It's the dilemma of athletes who choke under pressure, the speaker who forgets their words the moment they notice the crowd, the person who no longer knows if they're being genuine or just observed. Attention changes the system, even in your own mind, which raises a question that slips past science and lands in philosophy. Can you ever truly know yourself if the act of knowing alters who you are? Is the self something solid, or is it more like a pattern always shifting under the spotlight? Because if watching a particle changes its behavior, and watching yourself changes your mind, then what part of you is real? The one who acts, or the one who watches? And what happens when the light of attention grows too bright? Temporal self-compression. When your future becomes a stranger, think back to who you were 10 years ago. Not just your appearance, but the way you thought, the things you believed, what made you angry, what made you hopeful. That version of you probably feels distant, maybe even unfamiliar. You can remember them, but remembering isn't the same as being them. Now imagine yourself 10 years from now. Try to picture them clearly. What do they care about? What do they look like? What are they trying to fix, or forget, or protect? Chances are that image is even blurrier. This is temporal self-compression, the psychological phenomenon where we perceive distant versions of ourselves, whether in the past or future, as less distinct, less real, and less us than who we are right now. Just as distant objects appear smaller in space, our minds shrink the selves that exist far from the present moment. The farther away they are in time, the less they feel like part of our true identity. This compression has profound consequences. When you delay going to the gym, or postpone saving for retirement, or procrastinate on confronting a difficult truth, you often do it not out of laziness, but because on some level you don't feel like the consequences will land on you. They'll fall on someone else. A future version, a shadow, an abstract placeholder. Studies show that when people think of their future selves, the brain often activates regions similar to when they think of strangers. The person you'll be in 2040 feels psychologically more distant than a neighbor you've never met. And that creates a paradox. We know, rationally, that time will pass, that the future self is coming, that it will be us who wakes up in that body, with those regrets or rewards. And yet, emotionally, it doesn't feel that way. This disconnect is why people struggle to make sacrifices in the present for rewards they won't see until years later. Why we binge and regret. Why we plan and then abandon. Why we make promises to ourselves that we never quite keep. Temporal self-compression isn't just about memory or imagination, it's about identity. And that identity, it turns out, is fragile across time. We think of ourselves as consistent, but the truth is more fluid, more fragmented. The self we inhabit now feels central. The selves from before or after feel peripheral, narrative characters with our name, but different souls. And yet those characters are the ones who pay the price or reap the reward. So the question becomes, how do you bridge the distance? How do you act today with the awareness that tomorrow's you is still you, equally real, equally deserving of care? The answer might not come from logic, but from empathy. Not for others, for yourself, for the person you were and the person you're becoming. To treat them not as vague shadows of now, but as travelers on the same path, carrying the same heart. Because if you fail to recognize yourself in the future, you might abandon someone who needed you most. And that someone was always you. Call of the void. The silent urge to leap. You're standing at the edge of a cliff. The air is clean, the view vast. There's no danger, no chaos. You're not suicidal. You're simply alive. And yet a whisper brushes against the mind. Jump. It isn't loud, it's not a voice in the traditional sense, but it's there, brief, sharp, inexplicable. The urge doesn't come from pain or despair. In fact, it often arrives during moments of clarity, when everything is calm, when life feels precious, and still it echoes. This phenomenon is known as l'appel du vide, French for the call of the void. Psychologists have used the term to describe that fleeting, bizarre impulse to swerve into oncoming traffic, to step off the platform as a train arrives, to veer just slightly toward disaster, not because you want to die, but precisely because you don't. At first glance, the call of the void seems deeply irrational. Why would the brain suggest something so violent, so final, so out of step with our desire to survive? But perhaps that's just it. The brain isn't suggesting it. It's recognizing something deeper, something buried within the architecture of being human. A kind of mental edge case, a reflection of just how fine the line is between control and chaos. One explanation is that these urges are the brain's strange way of affirming life. By entertaining the possibility of death, however briefly, we reaffirm our desire to stay grounded, to remain breathing, to not fall. It's a contrast effect. By peering into the abyss, we appreciate the light above it. Another perspective suggests it's about agency. Standing at the edge of something vast or lethal reminds us of our own power. You could jump, you could end everything, but you won't. And that quiet resistance, unspoken and instinctive, reaffirms your autonomy. But it's not always comforting. For many, the thought is haunting because it arrives uninvited, without warning, and feels like a betrayal from within. We like to think of ourselves as cohesive beings, unified in purpose. Yet here is proof, however subtle, that the mind contains shadows we do not command. That behind every conscious decision lives a flicker of chaos, a glitch in the matrix of self-preservation. And that flicker asks disturbing questions. If a part of me can want to leap, even for a moment, what else might it want? How much of my mind is truly mine? Am I the author of my thoughts or merely their observer? The call of the void isn't a death wish. It's something stranger, more metaphysical. It's the awareness that in every ordinary moment, the door to oblivion is slightly ajar, and part of us, just for a second, wonders what's behind it. But you don't jump. You blink. You breathe. You step back. And perhaps it's that quiet refusal, never spoken aloud, that reveals the depth of your will to live. Still, the whisper leaves a mark. Because now you know, the abyss doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers your name. The shadow self, the stranger within you. There's a part of you that you don't show anyone. Not because it's shameful, necessarily, but because it doesn't fit. It doesn't match who you want to be, how you want to be seen, or what the world asks of you. So you tuck it away, beneath the polite smile, behind the carefully chosen words, just out of reach from conscious light. But it doesn't disappear. It waits. It watches. It whispers. This hidden part of the psyche has a name. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, a term for all the parts of ourselves we deny, suppress, or exile. It isn't just about darkness. It's about the disowned qualities we consider unacceptable or dangerous or inconvenient. Anger, envy, cruelty, but also ambition, sexuality, even creativity, if they threaten our sense of control or conflict with our self-image. The shadow isn't evil. It's human. In fact, its presence is evidence that we care about being good. To maintain the mask of what we call identity, we draw a line between what is us and what is not. We push some traits outward into the shadows. But here's the trap. The more fiercely we deny those parts, the more power they gain. Because what we don't face, we don't control. And what we repress, we project. You see it when someone accuses others of selfishness while quietly manipulating for their own gain. When moral purity becomes cruelty in disguise. When the person who shouts loudest about integrity secretly betrays their own values. The shadow leaks out in judgments, outbursts, addictions, dreams. It doesn't stay buried. It finds ways to express itself, not always through violence or scandal, but through contradiction, through discomfort, through the subtle unraveling of a story we tell ourselves about who we are. But the real danger isn't in having a shadow. It's in pretending you don't. Jung believed that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires confrontation with the shadow, not to destroy it, but to integrate it, to acknowledge it without surrendering to it, to listen without obeying, to say, yes, that is part of me too. This isn't easy. It means sitting with thoughts that scare you, facing impulses that feel foreign, accepting that your goodness isn't pure, your motives not always clean, but in that discomfort lies something liberating. Because the more you know your shadow, the less it controls you. You stop being haunted by your own mind. You stop projecting your darkness onto others. And you begin to act, not out of fear of what you might be, but out of awareness of what you are. To be whole is not to be perfect. It's to carry both light and shadow, and to walk forward with both in view. Because when you shine a light inward, the shadow doesn't vanish. But it stops being a monster. It becomes a map. Terror management theory, how the fear of death shapes everything. You're walking through your day, buying coffee, checking messages, laughing at something small, and then something slips into your awareness. Maybe it's a headline, a distant siren, a sudden silence. Whatever it is, it reminds you someday all of this will end. And in that moment, the ordinary collapses. Mortality is no longer theoretical. It's real, and it's coming. Most people don't live with that awareness constantly. We push it down, build around it, mask it with goals and distractions. But according to terror management theory, TMT, that silent undercurrent, the awareness of death, is always flowing beneath the surface, and it's shaping far more than we realize. At its core, TMT proposes a simple, devastating idea. Much of human behavior is an unconscious defense against the fear of death. We know we are mortal. We know we will die, and this knowledge creates a deep existential anxiety, one that the psyche works tirelessly to manage. But we don't just hide from death. We compensate for it. One way we do this is by attaching ourselves to cultural worldviews, religions, ideologies, nations, systems of meaning that promise a sense of permanence. If you believe in something bigger than yourself, something eternal, then your death feels less final. You become a piece of a story that doesn't end when you do. Another strategy is self-esteem. When you feel like a valuable person, when your life seems significant, the threat of death feels less humiliating. You may die, but you mattered. You contributed. You were someone. And so, we strive for status, for virtue, for belonging. We defend our tribes. We lash out at threats to our worldview. Not always because of logic or pride, but because something ancient and anxious is whispering, hold on to what feels real. Protect what makes you feel eternal. The implications are chilling. Research has shown that when people are reminded of their mortality, even subtly, they become more nationalistic, more aggressive toward outsiders, more rigid in their beliefs. Death anxiety doesn't always make us gentle. Often, it makes us defensive, divided, willing to hurt in order to feel safe. But terror management isn't all about fear. It can also explain our noblest impulses, our desire to create, to connect, to leave something behind. The urge to write books, plant trees, raise children, start movements. These are all forms of symbolic immortality, echoes we hope will outlive the body. And maybe that's what makes TMT so unsettling. It doesn't suggest that death shapes a part of life. It suggests that death shapes everything, not through direct terror, but through the architecture of meaning itself. So what do you do with this knowledge? You could ignore it, bury it again, wrap yourself in distraction. Or you could face it and find a strange kind of freedom. Because when you accept the reality of death, you stop living in service to the fear. You start choosing what actually matters, not to your legacy, but to your living. You start writing not to be remembered, but because you're here. You start loving not to be eternal, but because today is yours. And that might be the only answer to death that truly holds. Moral licensing. When doing good gives you permission to do wrong. You help an elderly person cross the street. You recycle your trash. You donate to a cause that matters. You feel good, right? Even a small spark of virtue flickers in your chest. But then something curious happens. Later that day, you snap at a coworker, or indulge in something you usually resist, or judge someone with a quiet cruelty, and without saying it out loud, a thought settles in the background. It's fine. I've earned this. This is moral licensing, a psychological phenomenon where past good behavior gives us unconscious permission to make worse choices later. It's not calculated or cynical. It doesn't come from hypocrisy. It comes from the mind's quiet attempt to balance an invisible moral ledger. The idea is simple. When we do something virtuous, we feel more secure in our identity as a good person. And once that identity feels protected, we become more tolerant of actions that would otherwise conflict with it. Not because we've become worse people, but because we believe we're still good. It's a kind of psychological accounting. If your self-image is fragile, you defend it. But if it feels affirmed, even momentarily, you relax the rules. You tell yourself you're fair, so you stop questioning your bias. You think of yourself as generous, so you ignore your moments of selfishness. The stronger your sense of moral credit, the easier it is to overlook your own contradictions. In one study, people who affirmed their non-racist values were more likely to later make choices that favored white candidates over black ones, not out of malice, but because their earlier affirmation gave them unconscious permission to behave in ways that might otherwise conflict with their ideals. This happens everywhere. A company highlights its sustainability efforts while quietly exploiting labor. A politician touts their integrity while bending the truth in private. An individual speaks up against injustice, then treats a stranger with disdain. It's not always deception. Often, it's self-deception. A way of saying, I've done enough, I am enough, so this doesn't count against me. But of course it does. Moral licensing doesn't erase harm. It hides it beneath the comfort of our past virtues, and in doing so, it creates a dangerous illusion that goodness is a bank account and we can spend from it without cost. The truth is harder. Being a good person isn't a status you earn. It's a practice, an ongoing awareness, a willingness to notice the moments when your behavior doesn't match your values, not to punish yourself, but to return to yourself. Because the shadow of moral licensing isn't in the small moral slips, it's in the stories we tell to excuse them. The idea that one moment of kindness outweighs another of cruelty, that a single act of virtue cancels out the rest. But morality isn't math, it's motion. And when you stop moving toward who you mean to be, you drift. Hyperempathy syndrome, when other people's pain becomes your own. You're watching someone cry. Not just watching, you feel it. Your chest tightens. Your eyes burn. Their sadness seeps into your bloodstream like a dye. You flinch at violence in films, avoid certain news stories, and sometimes leave crowded rooms because it's all just too much. You don't just sense others' emotions, you absorb them. This is what some call hyperempathy syndrome, a heightened sensitivity to the emotions, pain, and mental states of others. While not officially recognized in clinical manuals, the experience is real for many. It's the quiet burden of those who feel too deeply, those who cry when strangers suffer, who carry the weight of other people's heartbreak long after it's gone. Empathy in itself is essential. It's what allows us to understand each other, to build compassion, to behave ethically. But hyperempathy crosses a threshold. It turns empathy into a flood that can overwhelm the boundaries of the self. You don't just care, you ache. You don't just understand, you mirror, and that mirroring can be disorienting. You might not know where your emotions end and another's begin. You might feel guilt for things you didn't cause, or sorrow for pain you can't fix. When a friend is suffering, you become unwell. When a child is mistreated, you can't sleep. The cruelty of the world doesn't just disturb you, it wounds you. Some who live this way describe it as a kind of emotional open wound, a constant exposure. Their nervous systems tuned too tightly, like a violin string that snaps under pressure. It's not weakness, it's permeability, a mind without armor. But that openness can come at a cost. Hyperempaths often struggle with burnout, anxiety, and emotional exhaustion. They may withdraw from social settings, not out of aloofness, but out of protection. Others may accuse them of being overly sensitive, too emotional, too reactive. What's misunderstood is that they're not exaggerating. They're feeling it all. Some develop what's known as empathic distress fatigue, where constant exposure to others' pain results in numbness, withdrawal, or even guilt over needing distance. They may become caretakers to everyone but themselves, giving until they're empty, then blaming themselves for needing rest. And yet there's something quietly heroic about these people. In a world that often rewards detachment, they remain open. In a culture that prizes toughness, they still care deeply, inconveniently, sometimes destructively, but always sincerely. The challenge is balance. Empathy, without boundaries, becomes suffering. The goal is not to close yourself off, but to learn containment. To recognize that you can feel with someone without falling into them, that your pain matters too, that you deserve the same compassion you give. Because if you burn for others but never warm yourself, the fire goes out. And maybe the true gift of hyperempathy isn't just sensitivity, it's the reminder that feeling is not a flaw, it's a form of presence, of depth, of refusal to look away. But even the softest hearts need rest. Alexithymia. When feelings have no name, there are moments when something heavy moves inside you, a tightening in the chest, a restlessness under the skin, a sense that something is wrong. But when someone asks what you're feeling, you pause. You reach for words. None come. Not because the emotion isn't there, but because it arrives without a name. A colorless fog drifting through the body, unspoken, undefined. This is alexithymia, a psychological condition characterized by difficulty identifying, describing, or even being consciously aware of one's own emotions. It doesn't mean you don't feel. In fact, many with alexithymia feel deeply, but the connection between those emotions and language is frayed, distant, or never formed at all. For some, this disconnection is lifelong. For others, it develops after trauma, when emotions become too overwhelming or dangerous to process directly, and the mind silences them for survival. Over time, the silence deepens. Feelings become vague, somatic sensations, fatigue, tension, nausea, numbness. The body speaks in discomfort when the mind cannot speak in feeling. Relationships become complicated. Loved ones ask for emotional honesty, but it feels like they're asking you to see through frosted glass. You want to answer, you want to understand, but you don't know what's happening inside you, only that something is. This isn't repression, it's absence. It's like trying to draw a map of a city you've never walked through. People ask if you're sad, or anxious, or angry, and all you can say is, I don't know, because you don't. Not really. And that not knowing becomes its own form of isolation. Alexithymia is not rare. Some estimates suggest up to 10% of the population experiences it in some form. It's more common in men than women, possibly due to social conditioning around emotional expression. It's also frequently seen in people on the autism spectrum, in those with PTSD, and in individuals with psychosomatic disorders. But here's what makes it so quietly painful. The emotions don't vanish, they pile up. Unnamed, unspoken, unresolved. They spill into physical symptoms, into outbursts, into fatigue, into indecision. Without names, emotions can't be processed, and what can't be processed festers. There are strategies. Journaling, especially about bodily sensations, can help draw lines between feeling and language. Therapy, especially somatic or emotion-focused approaches, can offer scaffolding. Even naming basic feelings, happy, sad, scared, mad, can open tiny cracks in the wall. But there is no instant bridge, only a slow, tender building of vocabulary, a learning to notice, to pause when something stirs, to say, I don't know what this is yet, but it's real. Because the truth is, everyone has emotional weather. Alexithymia just clouds the forecast. But the storm is still there. The sun is still there. You're not broken. You're just learning how to listen in a language you were never taught. And sometimes just recognizing that silence has weight is the beginning of a voice. Self-handicapping. When we build our own obstacles just to blame them. It's the night before something important. A presentation, an audition, a final exam. You feel the pressure begin to coil in your stomach. Tight, expectant. And instead of preparing, you reach for distractions. You stay up late. You drink too much. You don't study. And in the back of your mind, a quiet thought offers relief. If I fail, at least I'll know why. This is self-handicapping, a paradoxical behavior where people deliberately sabotage their own performance, not out of laziness, but out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of what it would mean to try your best and still not be enough. Because if you give something your full effort, if you go all in and still fall short, then what's left to protect you? Nothing. It's just you. Exposed. Unworthy. So instead, the mind plays a trick. It creates an excuse in advance. A buffer. A shield. By not trying fully, you don't risk your identity. If you fail, it was the lack of sleep, the procrastination, the chaos you allowed. Not you. Never fully you. It's an emotional insurance policy. Self-handicapping can take many forms. It can look like chronic procrastination, like perfectionism that stalls projects indefinitely, like substance use before a task, like overcommitting to too many things at once, so nothing gets your full attention. On the surface, it may even look like confidence. I don't need to prep, I'll wing it, but underneath, it's often panic wearing bravado as camouflage. And the tragedy is, it works. In the short term, self-handicapping protects the ego, but in the long term, it reinforces the very self-doubt it tries to avoid. Every time you underperform because of self-sabotage, your belief in your actual abilities erodes a little more. And over time, that becomes your reality, not that you couldn't do it, but that you never let yourself find out. It's a cycle of emotional self-defense that quietly calcifies into identity. I'm just not a morning person. I work best under pressure. I'm not the type to prepare. It's just how I am. But these aren't truths. They're survival stories. Stories we tell to make failure feel safer. And they come from somewhere. Often early experiences where failure was punished or where success brought unwanted pressure. Environments where being seen trying was more dangerous than staying hidden, where effort itself became risky. So what breaks the cycle? Not brute discipline, not shame, but gentleness, curiosity, a willingness to ask, what am I protecting myself from? And what would happen if I let myself truly try? Because trying fully isn't weakness, it's courage. Vulnerable, naked courage. The kind that says, I might fail. And that's okay, because my worth doesn't hinge on the outcome. It lives in the attempt. And slowly, with practice, you stop building traps for yourself. You stop treating success like a threat. You stop hiding behind the sabotage, and you show up, fully. Self-other merging, when your identity dissolves into someone else, you start spending time with someone, a lot of time. You begin picking up their phrases, mimicking their gestures, mirroring their moods. The way they think starts coloring the way you think. Their preferences shift your own. Over time, their inner world starts to feel like it's leaking into yours. And somewhere in the background, an unsettling question forms. Where do I end, and where do they begin? This is self-other merging, a psychological phenomenon where the boundary between your identity and someone else's becomes blurred. It can happen gradually or all at once, and often without notice. It isn't mind control. It isn't obsession. It's more like erosion of self, of separation, of clarity. At its core, it's a relational illusion. The belief that to love, to understand, to truly connect, you must become. And so you soften your edges, you shift your shape, you lower your guard, until one day your voice in your own head doesn't sound quite like yours anymore. In healthy doses, this kind of merging is natural. It happens when people fall in love, when close friends influence each other, when a parent empathizes deeply with a child. Human connection requires attunement. But when self-other merging becomes chronic, unconscious, or one-sided, it quietly dismantles your autonomy. You begin making choices that aren't yours. You feel emotions that didn't originate in you. You internalize someone else's pain, priorities, even personality, until you forget what you actually want, or think, or believe. It's not always romantic. Sometimes it's a charismatic mentor, a controlling partner, a dominant parent, or even a best friend. It's especially common among those who were raised in unpredictable emotional environments, where merging was a survival tactic. If you could anticipate others, shapeshift to their moods, you stayed safe, you stayed loved. But eventually, the cost becomes too high. Because when you become too entangled, conflict feels like betrayal. Saying no feels like abandonment. Wanting something different feels like you're tearing the fabric between you, and so you stop resisting. You stop expressing, you shrink. Until the relationship isn't two people, it's one person, and their reflection. The way back isn't dramatic. It's not about detachment or severing ties. It's about remembering you are not them. You are not responsible for feeling all their feelings, for solving all their problems, for becoming their echo. Healthy intimacy allows for closeness without collapse. You can care deeply without dissolving. You can love someone without vanishing inside them. And sometimes, reclaiming yourself starts with the simplest act, listening to your own thoughts and trusting they are yours. Emotional contagion, when other people's feelings infect your own. You enter a room, and something shifts before a word is spoken. A tightness in the air. A look exchanged. A posture. Someone's upset, and though they haven't said a thing, you already feel it bloom in your chest, an unease that wasn't there seconds ago. You weren't sad, but now you are. You weren't anxious, but now your heart beats differently. This is emotional contagion, the process by which one person's emotions and expressions trigger similar emotions in others, almost like catching a cold you didn't realize was airborne. It's fast, it's often unconscious, and it reshapes your internal weather, whether you invited it in or not. We tend to think of emotions as private, invisible, tied to thoughts, but feelings leak. They broadcast through body language, tone, micro-expressions, and our brains, especially the mirror neuron systems, are wired to tune in, replicating what we observe as if it were our own experience. This isn't weakness. It's biology. In evolutionary terms, emotional contagion helped groups synchronize. One person senses danger, their fear spreads, and the group reacts together. It's efficient, protective. But in modern life, it often plays out more subtly and more chaotically. You scroll past outrage online and feel tense for hours. You walk into a workplace humming with stress and leave feeling drained. You sit beside a grieving friend and find yourself weeping before they've said anything at all. Sometimes it's empathy in action, a beautiful resonance. Sometimes it's corrosive. You absorb anxiety that's not yours. You mirror moods you don't understand. You feel hijacked by atmospheres you didn't create. And if you're emotionally sensitive or highly attuned to others, this happens more often. You might find yourself always trying to fix the vibe, smoothing conflicts before they explode, carrying tension in your shoulders that belongs to someone else entirely. It's exhausting, it's invisible, and it can leave you wondering where your emotions actually end. Recognizing emotional contagion is the first step in separating from it. Ask, is this mine? Sometimes the answer isn't obvious, but the question creates space. Naming it helps. Noticing patterns helps. Building boundaries, not walls, but breathable filters, helps. Because emotions are real, but they're also contagious. And just like viruses, not every feeling you catch has to stay in your system. There is quiet power in recognizing what's yours, what isn't, and what you choose to carry forward. Identity disturbance. When your sense of self won't hold still. Some days you feel grounded, confident in who you are and what you believe, but on others you barely recognize yourself. Your voice sounds strange. Your choices don't feel like yours. Even the way you dress, the way you move through the world, seems foreign. Not wrong, exactly, just unstable. It's as if your identity keeps shifting beneath you, never settling long enough to feel real. This is identity disturbance, a disruption in the continuity, stability, or clarity of your self-image. It's not simply not knowing who you are. It's more like being a dozen different selves across time and space, never sure which one is true. Sometimes it feels like constantly adapting, being one person at work, another with friends, another in romantic relationships. You mirror, you mold, you perform, not out of deceit, but survival. You become what the room needs, what others expect, what the moment demands. Other times, it feels like emotional whiplash. One day you're pursuing a goal with conviction, the next you wonder if you ever really wanted it. You switch majors, careers, aesthetics. You question your values, your sexuality, your beliefs, not as growth, but as volatility. It's not exploration. It's fragmentation. And underneath it all is a quiet fear. What if there's nothing stable beneath the performance? What if I'm just a collection of masks? Identity disturbance is often associated with borderline personality dynamics, but it can emerge in many forms after trauma, during major life transitions, through intense codependent relationships, or even as a response to cultural and generational dislocation. It doesn't mean you're shallow or manipulative. It means your internal compass has been shaken or never fully allowed to form. When people grow up in environments where emotional consistency wasn't modeled, where love had conditions, or where safety depended on pleasing others, authenticity often becomes a luxury. You learn to read the room before you learn to read yourself. And over time, that vigilance hollows you out. There's a subtle grief in identity disturbance, a mourning for a self you never got to develop, a wish that you could simply be without questioning every moment, every move. But here's the truth. Identity isn't a static object. It's not something you find once and never lose. It's a process, a pattern, a slow remembering of what feels honest, a gentle return to the things that resonate, no matter how small. You don't need to define yourself completely. You don't need a label for every shadow. You only need to start noticing what feels real, what feels yours, even if it flickers. And in that noticing, you begin to stitch something together. Not a fixed self, but a faithful one. Not a perfect self, but a present one. Something that doesn't collapse when others leave. Something that doesn't vanish when silence falls. Something that whispers in your own voice, I am still here. Even when everything else is shifting. If you're still here, thank you. Thank you for wandering with us through the strangest corners of the mind, through distortions, echoes, and fragile truths. Most people turn away from this kind of discomfort. But you stayed. You listened. You wondered. These phenomena aren't just curiosities. They're clues about what it means to think, to feel, to be. Let them stay with you. Let them challenge the certainty. Let them soften the edges. And if something stirred in you, an insight, a question, a quiet recognition, consider leaving a comment. We read them all. It's where this conversation continues. If you found this journey meaningful, a like or a share helps it reach others who might need it. And if you'd like more slow descents into thought and mystery, you know where to find us. Until next time, rest gently, stay curious, and keep asking the questions most people won't.